Donal MacIntyre, investigative journalist best known for his fearless work confronting dangerous criminal organisations, is on a mission to uncover the modern face of international crime. Travelling with him to some of the world's best-known cities, we'll meet members of the criminal underworld, police and local residents to discover what life is really like in the world's toughest towns. Donal's in an American city with one of the highest murder rates in the country.
It's everybody killing everybody.
A place where politics and big business fuels an illegal trade in sex.
And who's buying sex in Washington?
Politicians. They got money to spend.
Where for many young men, life expectancy is as low as 19.
Might have to worry about people shooting you, robbing you, all that stuff.
Donal's come to Washington D.C. to find out what makes it one of the world's toughest towns. Washington D.C, the capital of America, is a compact city of just over 500,000 residents. Despite its modest size, each year as many as 20 million people come to see the sights and check out the most iconic residence in America, the White House. It's an impressive city, of vast avenues and imposing buildings, their very size and stature signifying the scale of America's power.
But there's another side to Washington, a story behind these wonderful monuments and marbled buildings. And it's the story of drugs, murder, and poverty.
Washington is a divided city split between rich and poor, haves and have-nots, and white and black. It has one of the highest crime rates of any American city, with an average of 15 violent murders every month. It's a city plagued by poverty and gang violence, and the gap between different social classes is widening at an alarming rate. Over 50% of Washington's population is African American, and the historic election of Barack Obama, America's first black president, ushers in a new era of change. But Washington is still a city with very real divisions.
What always amazes me is how can Congress and the White House exist and live in a city where things are so screwed up?
In Washington, D.C. in 2007, 1 in 70 people were victims of violent crime, almost 3 times the national average.
Drugs and guns have helped make D.C. the murder capital of the United States.
The huge crime levels are fueled by crack cocaine, a drug that has devastated the poor black communities of Washington since its emergence in the 80s. One of its bitter legacies is a soaring homicide rate. Donal's here to find out how this culture of drugs and violence can operate within a stone's throw of the White House. He's going to ride along with the police units on the front line of the war against drugs, guns, and prostitution. And he's going to meet the ex-gang members who are standing up to the rising crime and preaching a message of peace on the streets.
Today, they would kill you because you just looked at them wrong.
But first, Donal is heading to leafy Georgetown, Washington's most desirable neighbourhood. It's a fashionable quarter of the capital, popular with the well-heeled. Georgetown is less than half a mile away from the White House. But even here, amongst the expensive shops and the cobblestone streets, Washington's violent criminal element is never far away. Donal's arranged to meet Toby Harnden, the US editor of British newspaper The Daily Telegraph. Toby knows only too well how these seemingly peaceful streets can turn nasty. 2 years ago, he had arranged to meet up with a friend of his who had recently moved to Washington.
A friend of mine, Alan Sennett, who was an aspiring politician, who was over here. He was renting a place in Georgetown, was very excited to be here. We were in email contact, just setting up time to meet and catch up.
Unfortunately, Toby never got a chance to meet his friend. Alan Sennett was brutally murdered on this quiet, leafy back street of Georgetown. It was a murder that sent shock waves across the city. Alan Sennett, a 27-year-old British political campaigner, had lived in Washington for only 3 weeks. In the summer of 2006, Alan was walking his female companion home. Just outside her house, they were approached by 3 men wielding a gun and a knife.
Initially, it looked like it was a robbery, a hold-up. Both of them cooperated, but at that point, it took an even uglier turn.
According to the police reports, the assailant with the gun grabbed the woman and began dragging her down this driveway. It was here that he attempted to rape her.
Alan, you know, he was very brave. He was a hero, really. He couldn't stand there and just watch that happening. So he made a move, and then in the melee, they held him down and they slit his throat, and then he died over there.
Callous.
Absolutely inhuman and pointless and senseless.
Barely 3 hours later, police arrested 4 people in connection with the murder. Among them was a woman and a 15-year-old boy. The gang were known to the police for a string of other violent attacks. They pleaded guilty to murder, and the 2 ringleaders, Christopher Piper and Jeffrey Rice, were given a combined sentence of 89 years in prison. Sennett's murder raised fears that the violent crime endemic in Washington's poorer parts was spreading to the city's more affluent areas. Alan's murder seemed to symbolise the crossing of boundaries between the 2 worlds. To understand the nature and spread of crime in Washington, it becomes clear to Donal that he'll need to cross to the other side and explore Washington's darker corners. Donal MacIntyre's in Washington D.C, the capital of America. A stately city, home to some of America's most famous landmarks. But look behind this facade, and what is revealed is a much bleaker picture. Washington is a racially divided city. More black men are jailed here every year than graduate from high school. The black majority originally came to Washington on the run from the Deep South. Victims of slavery and prejudice, many believed that in the capital, they could get a piece of the American dream. The reality has been characterized by poverty and violence. Nowhere in America is the inequality between the races more evident than in the capital. Many of Washington's inner city problems stem from the use of illegal narcotics. In the late 80s, a new drug emerged, the side effects of which catapulted Washington to murder capital of the USA. Crack is a cheaper, highly addictive derivative of cocaine. The drug swept across America, pushed by dealers who made huge profits as the addiction set in. Crack devastated many of America's inner city communities.
This city was one crazy city in the 1990s, murder capital in the US. And listen, you know a city's got its problems when the mayor is addicted to crack cocaine.
At the height of the crack epidemic, the problem spread from the streets to City Hall. The mayor at that time was Marion Barry Jr.
But unfortunately, we do have a serious problem of drug-related targeted killings.
But in 1990, Marion Barry hit the headlines when he was caught by the FBI smoking crack cocaine in a hotel room. Footage of the FBI raid was broadcast across the world, causing shockwaves throughout America. Barry was arrested and served 6 months in prison. Amazingly, he was re-elected as Washington's mayor just 4 years later.
Congratulations.
Marion Barry has agreed to meet Donal at a famous Washington landmark, Ben's Chili Bowl Diner. Donal hopes Barry can shed some light on why this city has become such a dangerous place. Although no longer the mayor, Marion Barry is still involved in politics and is a much-loved figure in the Washington black community.
How did your drug problem start?
I don't know. I guess you start, a long time you resist it, and at some point somebody offers you something. You say no, what to do? Find yourself in it. It has no respecter of position, of color, of title, of income, of nothing.
And your personal experience really matched, in many ways, tells the story of Washington.
What it does, it gives you a better view of what life is all about on the other side of the street. You got the have and the have-nots, and the situation getting worse. That is, the divide between the have and have-nots in Washington, D.C. is getting worse.
Marion Barry's political career started 40 years ago as an activist in the civil rights movement.
What kind of place was this city in the 60s?
It's changed drastically. You know, back in that time, the divide was much wider. I mean, would you believe as late as 1955 in Washington, D.C., there was segregation. The schools were segregated. It was very, very polarized.
For Washington's black community, the anger they felt about this inequality erupted on the 4th of April 1968, the day Martin Luther King was assassinated. Thousands of people took to the streets of Washington when they heard the news. For 3 days, Washington was subjected to some of the most violent and destructive riots ever witnessed on American soil.
There was rage, black rage, and they showed it through burning things down.
For 3 days, Washington burned. The city was completely devastated. Entire blocks were reduced to rubble.
But it woke up America, I tell you that. America was in tremendous shock. They didn't believe that black people were that fed up.
Washington was nearly destroyed. The city was rebuilt, but now 30 years on, poverty and inequality remain. Conditions which paved the way for the trouble of the 1990s.
And how did this city become the notorious murder capital of the USA?
The crack cocaine epidemic did that. There were murders, people were fighting over turf, fighting over the billions of dollars that were coming in, had captured victims and villains.
There are now half as many murders in Washington than during the height of the crack epidemic. However, the drug is still a scourge in low-income inner-city housing projects, and as Donal's just discovered, it can also reach the highest level of political office. Marion Barry's continued presence on the political scene is an embarrassment for many DC residents. But he is not the only politician in this city to have hit the headlines for a scandal. In Washington, D.C., a city of powerful political players, scandal is never far away. Every week, large numbers of lobbyists, fundraisers and politicians all converge on the city, eager to do business. And it's no surprise that when a large number of men hit town, many without the company of their wives, another sort of business can flourish. Prostitution is big business here. Girls are trafficked into the city from all over the world to meet the demand for sex. Prostitution is illegal here, but that hasn't stopped sex scandals from rocking the foundations of Capitol Hill, the very seat of American political power. In one spectacular case a few years ago, the whole house of cards came close to tumbling down. In October 2006, Deborah Jean Palfrey was arrested for running one of Washington's biggest prostitution rings. Better known as the D.C. Madam, Palfrey ran a very successful high-class escort service. When police raided her house, they seized her telephone records, from which a number of high-profile political figures were identified.
I think that there was fear on Capitol Hill and also fear in the top echelons of the executive branch that there were going to be names of people who were Johns of the D.C. Madam.
Washington was gripped as the D.C. Madam threatened to sell her client list to pay for her legal defence. One of the first casualties was Randall Tobias, the Deputy Secretary of State. Before he resigned, he ran the Bush administration's program to crack down on prostitution.
Tobias reportedly told ABC he had called on the business for in-condo massages.
The fear on Capitol Hill was, who's next? Who's next?
If convicted, Palfrey faced a jail sentence of up to 55 years for her role in running a multi-million-dollar vice racket. But just before her trial, the D.C. Madam committed suicide. It was the end of the Palfrey story, but not the end of prostitution in Washington, D.C.
She got busted. There are 30 D.C. Madams right now. Probably have clients upstairs in this hotel.
A quick internet search for Washington, D.C. escort services yields hundreds of results. Massage parlours and spas offering in-call and out-call services advertise freely. Most of them are located in downtown Washington, in the heart of the business district. Prostitution is where the legitimate business of D.C. collides with the illegal world of sex trafficking.
This is downtown DC, and this is where big business meets big politics. This is known as the lobbyist corridor. The White House is just 3 blocks down there to the right. But in just a couple of hours, the lobbyist corridor becomes the prostitutes' runway.
When the working day ends, the streets in this part of town take on a seedier atmosphere. Inspector Steve Schwarm works for the Prostitution Unit, a specialist department devoted to investigating sex trafficking within DC. Tonight, the unit is planning a raid on a massage parlour in downtown Washington.
That is our target location. And considering we're going to be set up, we're going to try and pull into this bus stop area here so that way we can kind of observe our undercover officer entering the location.
The target for tonight's bust is a Korean massage parlour.
Schwarm is in the area.
The Prostitution Unit have sent in an undercover officer whose job it is to establish if prostitution is happening on the premises.
A lot of these Korean massage parlors are nothing but fronts for prostitution. You know, some of these girls that may work in a Korean massage parlor will be told, oh, you know, I got a cleaning job for you, or I'm gonna be a maid. They come to America, and of course, you know, she's forced into prostitution.
The unit get the call from the undercover officer and enter the building.
Okay, sir, get dressed. Anybody else any more customers to get them dressed?
As they suspected, the massage parlour is a front for an illegal brothel.
Can you speak English, dear? Okay, stay right there. Stay right there.
The girls claim not to understand English, so the police begin to search the property for evidence of prostitution.
Oh, look at this. We got money. It was thrown under a mattress. Eyes open.
The girls that actually work here stay on the premises 24 hours a day. There's cots set up in the back. They sleep here. It's not a fun life. These girls can see anywhere from 20 to 40 customers a day.
Police find a pile of cash and some underwear in the room. But as the client was not caught in the act, he's allowed to go free. But the police arrest one of the girls. She'll be charged with soliciting and prostitution. Often these girls are trafficked into the country illegally and forced into this type of work. For the police to catch the traffickers, they have to hope that some of the girls will be willing to testify against them. But they are terrified of reprisals, and so this seldom happens. The biggest victims, the ones that always lose, are the girls. To get a first-hand account of what it's like to work as a prostitute in this city, Donal's arranged to meet someone who knows all too well what dangers these streets can bring. Donna has been a prostitute in D.C. for the past 20 years. She will only talk to Donal in the presence of her pimp, Eric. Her experience of walking the streets has given her a unique insight into how this city operates.
Now, in terms of Washington, is sex big business in Washington?
Washington is a sex city. Pussy sells in Washington, without a question. It does.
And who's buying sex in Washington?
Everybody from the common Joe up to the most high.
The politicians, when they want to get away from the business and take the tie off, without a doubt, they got money to spend.
But Donna is fully aware of the dangers that her lifestyle exposes her to.
I've lost a lot of girlfriends in the lifestyle like that, you know, and their life was taken from getting in cars and never returning. And you would think that would change my way of living, but it's my way of surviving.
These dangers often force prostitutes to work for a pimp. Too often, however, it's the pimps themselves rather than the clients that can pose the biggest threat to the girls.
Some pimps run their things on the fear and on the violence, okay? Some of them actually just run them on that, and they say they care, but they don't really care. I mean, it's just the sort of thing where, you know, look, go get me my money. If you don't have my money, bang, bang.
This is something that Donna has endured herself.
You're not even expecting it. You know, your daddy calls you up and, you know, talk to you, you know, make you feel comfortable and stuff, and then, you know, hit you with, you know, I know that you, I know that you ain't do what you're supposed to do, and then you get some, you know, they call it pimp smack. It's from the backhand. And then after, they'll do that to you. You know, you give oral sex to them, you know, to them, and you fuck them and stuff like that, and then you send you out the street with a busted lip and black eye and stuff. So I know what it's like to be abused.
Clearly, in Washington, big business rubs shoulders with the seedier world of prostitution. There's a lot of money floating around this city, and also a lot of money to be made. And in a city that is as fractured and divided as Washington, it's not hard to find gangs, pimps, or sex traffickers willing to exploit others for personal gain. Coming up, Donal accompanies local law enforcement as they hunt down a gunman.
Anyway, the officers of the FBI are about to pounce.
And discovers how easy it is to buy an AK-47 assault rifle. Washington, D.C. has one of the highest violent crime rates of any city in America. It's also one of America's most divided cities.
The divide between the have and have-nots in Washington, D.C. is getting worse.
While prostitution and politics mix in the high-rise business district, Washington's poorer neighborhoods are plagued with drug-induced violence and drive-by shootings. Every day within the shadow of the White House, police are engaged in a constant battle to curb rising crime and remove guns from the streets. Donal wants to see for himself the challenges in keeping law and order in this city. So he's arranged to ride along with the city police, whose job it is to combat this violence.
Well, if anyone's going to show me the city beyond the monuments, beyond the Lincoln Memorial, then it's these guys. We're going to roll with them. You're going to look after us for the evening, are you?
We're going to try to take care of you.
10-4 with 2 civilian ride-alongs.
Immediately after leaving the station, we enter an area of Washington that feels very different. Donal's driving through a neighbourhood called Trinidad. It's a run-down inner-city area of Washington, but the monuments up on Capitol Hill and the White House are only a mile away. Despite the short distance from the White House, it seems like a totally different city.
So what are the neighbourhoods that give you the most trouble?
Well, the neighborhood that we're driving through right now is Trinidad, and it typically was one of our busiest neighborhoods in the whole city.
There were times during the summer where it was extremely violent with multiple homicides.
Trinidad has one of the highest crime rates in the city. The neighbourhood is afflicted by gun violence. Drive-by shootings plague the area. Earlier in the year, military-style checkpoints were set up to stop and search all vehicles entering Trinidad in an attempt to curb the crime epidemic. For the residents, it made returning home feel like entering a war zone.
Trinidad should not be treated like Baghdad. We cannot have that here in Washington, D.C.
It was a desperate attempt to curb the murder rate, but the killings continued.
And who's killing who?
It's everybody killing everybody.
And it's kind of ridiculous. You could have a crew of guys that live on this street beefing with a crew of guys that live on this street. They'll go back and forth between the neighborhoods shooting each other.
Gang-related murder in D.C. is one of the highest in the USA. And like everywhere else in America, it's nearly always related to drugs and the fight to control the market. Donal's riding with the patrol when a call comes in from the dispatcher.
What's that location, ma'am? And who is attempting to execute a search warrant?
FBI.
The FBI had requested assistance to arrest a violent gang member who is wanted in relation to a triple shooting. All units in the area are ordered to meet at a nearby secret location.
And as a measure of how serious they're taking this, the FBI have brought maybe 15, 20 heavily armed guys, and the local police force here have brought 6, now 7 patrol cars with more on the way. There's quite a lot of firepower here for one guy.
Remember, you always want to go there outgunning your opposition. You always want to be in a superior protective posture compared to what they're in, so that's what we're going for.
A call comes through to say the FBI are making their move. The suspect, a notorious gang leader, has been positively identified working in a takeaway pizza joint just a few blocks away. With the suspect's violent history, the police units are here to back up the FBI in case something goes wrong.
Okay, the undercover officer has gone in. He's identified the presence of the man on a warrant. The fugitive is wanted for a triple shooting. Where the officers of the FBI are about to pounce.
You don't draw this much heat unless you're a seriously dangerous individual, and there's a very real chance that the suspect could be armed.
They haven't gone in yet. You can see them all standing, heavily armed.
But the suspect soon realises he is outgunned and surrenders.
They've got the alleged gang member. He's on the floor. He's been taken by surprise. So it's a pretty safe job all around.
The individuals in custody.
Without a single shot fired and their man in custody, this has been a successful raid for the FBI.
So there are a whole bunch of people coming up for a pizza and just confronted with, you know, half a platoon of Glocks and AK-47s and semi-automatics and the FBI, and they just took a guy down who's wanted for a triple shooting, gang-related, earlier this summer, and he's working in a pizza parlor.
Guns are such a big problem in this city that the police have a dedicated gun recovery unit who are tasked with retrieving as many illegal firearms as they can find on the street. It's run by Sergeant Sloan, who has invited us to witness a search of the premises of a suspected drug dealer.
We're searching. We have found what we consider a good quantity of narcotics and a firearm and a large quantity of cash. If you bring your film camera over toward me, I don't know if you need any light. There's a large quantity of cocaine there. There's a handgun right here. From October 30th, 07 to October 30th, 08, just this gun unit recovered 505 guns from the streets of Washington, D.C. So you figure that's more than one a day. So it's with great regularity that we encounter firearms.
It's been a successful night for the gun recovery unit. They have arrested a known drug dealer and taken one more weapon off the streets of D.C. Violent gang-related crime is increasing in areas like Trinidad, and the police are locked in a constant fight against it. Donal's witnessed the effects that guns have in poor neighbourhoods and experienced firsthand the fear that is felt on these streets. But on occasion, that fear can spread across the entire city, as in the case of the notorious Washington sniper. In the autumn of 2002, Washington became a city overrun with terror and paranoia. Over a period of 3 weeks, 10 people were murdered in the Washington area, most of them killed by a single bullet from a sniper's rifle. The killings were random and without an obvious motive. A man was shot outside his house while mowing his lawn. Another was killed at a petrol station. A child was shot outside his school. It was clear that anyone was a potential target.
It was true terror in this region for a number of weeks. I remember literally walking across Connecticut Avenue and zigzagging across the street so as not to become a target. At any time of day, anywhere you were, you could get plugged.
Two men were eventually arrested for the killings. John Allen Muhammad, an ex-soldier, and Lee Boyd Malvo, who was just 17 years old.
I think from that perspective, Washingtonians were relieved that it was just two lone gunmen. But there was no kind of resolution of, gee whiz, why did this happen? And to this day, I'm not even sure that I could explain to you, or anyone can explain to you, why these two men were actually just shooting people from their car.
The United States has always held a liberal view on gun possession, but the gun violence in Washington has been so severe that for many years this city had its own unique gun policy. Handguns were outlawed in 1975 and it became illegal to buy one here. In 2007, this law was controversially revoked as it was deemed unconstitutional for Americans not to have the right to bear arms to defend themselves.
I'm about to go to one of the few places in the outskirts of Washington D.C. where you can actually buy a gun. And that's because until very recently, when the Supreme Court overturned a ruling, simply you couldn't buy or carry a gun within the precincts of Washington D.C. But that now all is about to change, and I suspect business for the Blue Ridge Arsenal gun shop is about to go up.
This shop sells an astonishing variety of weapons, from small handguns to fully automatic machine guns. Despite the 32-year ban, Washington was still the murder capital of the USA during the 1990s crack epidemic. But now that handguns have been legalised, the worry is that the murder rate will once again rise.
D.C. is probably one of the most highest crime cities in the nation anyway.
Yeah.
Even with the gun ban. So
it's made no difference?
Yes.
So what could I buy now?
If everything is clean, you can walk out with the gun same day.
Same day?
Yes. It's AK-47. It's a great gun. Well,
I need to get, with a gun like this, 3 forms of ID, is that correct?
3 forms of ID.
Virginia resident, I need to have a clean record, no criminal record, and I need to have the money, and that's it, and then it's mine.
It's shocking. In a city working hard to curb its high rates of violent crime, anyone can walk into a shop like this and walk out with an AK-47. Washington D.C., America's capital and also one of its most fractured cities. The gap between the rich and poor in Washington is growing wider. And when your options are limited, sometimes criminality seems like the only way out of the ghetto.
It's everybody killing everybody.
In the inner city neighbourhoods, gangs fight to control the markets, drugs, guns and prostitution. According to official figures, there are over 170 gangs in DC, with an estimated 3,000 gang members, many of whom are second or third generation. Older members of the community, some ex-gang members themselves, are trying to help young people get out of the gangs and provide them with alternatives to a life of crime.
This is a group called Ceasefire, which is run to try and keep young men out of gang activity. And it's not run by other young men, it's actually run by the elders of the community, guys who spent a lot of time on the streets and some of them a lot of time in jail. And that's how they garner a bit of respect with the youth. Oh!
Al-Malik Farrakhan, a one-time bank robber and gang leader, started Ceasefire after spending 35 years in jail. He tells Donal that guns were an issue in DC even back when he was running the streets.
Gunplay started with us. It did start with us. It wasn't as readily, but we had many gun battles right out here. We always had gangs, but we wasn't, man, we was pop, pop, pop, getting it up. Occasionally, we get our man, but he had to do something so bad that he deserved to fucking die. Today, they would kill you because you just looked at them wrong.
But it was while Malik was in prison that he decided that something had to change.
Watching the youngins come in, they were lost, man, not coming in the way we came in, as men in the penal system and standing as men, but lost. They was snitching, they was telling, I mean, they were killing one another. So I said, wait a minute, I gotta start something to give them self-esteem back. To teach them, man, that this is Willie Lynch is a move to make you be enemies of one another when he's really not your enemy. He look just like you, he got nothing just like you ain't got. He's oppressed just like you. So this was the birth of Ceasefire. Man, I'd been smacked out the wheelchair. I had a Uzi stuck in my mouth, but the one that smacked me out the wheelchair became a hell of a ceasefire member. The one that stuck the Uzi in there became a hell of a ceasefire member.
Malik has arranged for Donal to meet some of the young gang members he's working with.
These are the young brothers that nobody want to deal with, man. And they're not faking. They ain't just got them little masks on, right? They're not gonna say nothing to incriminate, but they're gonna be truthful with you.
They are taking a big risk congregating in such a public setting, so Donal only has a short time with them. These are the guys who can tell him what it's like to live and die on the tough streets of DC.
Now, what's the best way of making money on the streets?
Hustle.
Hustle. Okay, what are you hustling? Is it girls?
It could be anything.
Anything,
Anything,
man. You can hustle anything.
Drugs.
You can do it.
Anything to get money, you know.
If you want to get an AK-47 or something, would that be difficult?
That's easy, man. We can get that before we can get a job out here. Like, that's nothing. That ain't nothing. You can get that now.
Living by these rules is not a game. The average life expectancy of a gang member in America is just 19.
And what was the last funeral you guys went to?
Oh, no, that was last week, Saturday.
And what happened? Who died?
Oh, one homeboy. Yeah, one of our close friends. Got shot.
You must feel that, you know, if one of your mates dies, that it could be you next.
Yeah, like, oh yeah.
We think, you know, might not make it a couple more years, you know, 2-3 more years. I might have a feeling like I won't be here. I might be here for a couple more weeks or months. Some people feel that way.
Some people say that DC has improved and it's, you know, it's a different kind of DC, you know, and it's safer for everybody in the streets now. But is that true for you guys?
I guess if it's safer for like tours and all that, like, but where we live at, no, it ain't too safe. If you gotta look around your back every 5 seconds, look at every moving car to make sure nothing ain't happening. No, it ain't too safe.
You might have to worry about people shooting you, robbing you, snitches, all that stuff.
When young guys like these regularly attend funerals for their friends, it brings home how tough life in Washington really is. And when they readily admit that they are doubtful about making it past their teenage years, you have to wonder how much has changed in this city. The fact that the communities most affected by poverty, violence and crime live in the shadow of the nation's monuments to equality, freedom and prosperity is startling. This proximity contributes to the rage and despair Donal has uncovered on the streets of Washington. Barack Obama has moved into the White House, bringing with him the promise of change. Time will only tell whether for the people of Washington, D.C., he can deliver on that promise. Donal MacIntyre, investigative journalist best known for his fearless work confronting dangerous criminal organisations, is on a mission to uncover the modern face of international crime. Travelling with him to some of the world's best-known cities, we'll meet members of the criminal underworld, police and local residents to discover what life is really like in the world's toughest times. We're in Mexico City, where organised crime has been responsible for more carnage than many wars.
Rocket-propelled grenades, AK-47s, bazookas. The government has lost control here.
This is a city where no one is safe on the streets. Where ruthless kidnapping gangs are terrorising the population.
You prepare in a way to be killed.
Siquiera la muerte merecen, porque la muerte sería un halago para ellos.
City, the capital of Mexico, has a population of 20 million people and is one of the largest cities in the world. It's famed for its cuisine and rich culture. But look beyond the mariachis and margaritas, and you discover that Mexico City is an extremely volatile place. The gap between rich and poor has grown rapidly in recent years, leading to a phenomenal rise in violent crime, making Mexico City one of the most dangerous places on the planet. Donal's here to find out how a combination of poverty and corruption has led to a crime and murder epidemic that last year claimed the lives of more than 5,500 people. Here in Mexico City, it seems that violence and death are on public display. Just a glance at a newspaper stall leaves you in no doubt about the scale of violent crime in the city.
Look at this. This is the back page of one of the main papers here, La Prensa. Police, gangsters, dead bodies. Look, strewn all over the place. Unbelievable.
These graphic pictures are fed to the papers by photographers who go in search of the most gruesome crime scenes. A British contact of Donal's has arranged for him to go out on a nighttime photo shoot with Mexico City's violent crime paparazzi.
This is Monumento. We're here, and all these guys are crime reporters with various different newspapers, radio stations, these guys as well. And they basically just hang out here and wait for any information to come in. Maybe they're scanning the radio, so they're getting information that way. And just see if there's a murder or an accident, and then from here they leg it off to wherever the accident is and go and cover the news.
So why is it dangerous?
It's dangerous because you never know if something's gone down, like a shootout outside of a bar or something. You never know if it's still happening or if more trouble kicks off when the police gets there. So they have come across, like, you know, bullets flying, or they've had their cameras ripped away, or they've been shoved around, beaten up. There is a risk, you know, anything can happen at night.
John has introduced Donal to one of the most experienced crime reporters in the city.
Why are the images which you take of dead bodies and riddled bodies so popular with the public?
Y aquí toda la mayoría de la gente les gusta el morbo de ver muertos, la sangre. No sé si la gente de aquí compra los periódicos y cuando llega la nota roja, lo policíaco, ya se queda ahí y empieza a ver más, empieza a ver las fotos, ¿no? Las imágenes que...
Donal is beginning to suspect that violence and death are an accepted part of the culture.
It seems that everywhere you look, there's a police car. Everywhere. Cruising the streets. But as yet, no action from the boys. Some nights they say that they're going backwards, to and fro, 100 miles an hour, all across the city. But for the moment it's quiet. But it surely can't be quiet for too long.
Nos.
Soon enough, the photographers intercept a call about a murder across town. The press team speed through the streets, running red lights and screeching around corners in a macabre race to be the first to arrive at the scene of the crime. They arrive at the scene at the same time as the first police officers. And sure enough, there is a dead body lying in the street. The police make half-hearted attempts to keep the photographers at bay. And the arrival of the ambulance seems of secondary importance to capturing the images that will sell to the newspapers. It's becoming clear that in Mexico City, murder is big business and people seem to have become desensitized to it.
Well, this is the guy's staple diet: dead bodies, mayhem. They believe that it was a gunshot, the back of the head. We've allowed ridiculously close to the scene of the shooting.
Finally, the police cordon off the area and start gathering evidence.
We may be stepping on the casing, and that's how quick the reporters, the crime reporters, have got to the scene. We're now being asked to lift up our feet because the bullet casing that took that man's life is just here. And that was found by the photographer.
It seems that the photographers have got what they need, and the scene starts to wind down.
This is a very common scene for you, David. This is a normal night.
Sí, aquí en la Ciudad de México sí, es muy común. Ya es de todos los días.
Do you ever worry that you might end up on the front page as a dead body of in a newspaper yourself?
Pues te pasa alguna vez por la mente, ¿no? Te pasa alguna vez por la mente que vayas a ser tú el que te vayan a tomar la foto, ¿no? Es como una, digamos que una regla de oro, ¿no? Entre nosotros. Si, por ejemplo, algún compañero de nosotros llegara a caer, no tomaríamos foto de él. Por respeto al compañero no lo harías.
We came here with Donal knowing Mexico City was dangerous, but we weren't expecting to see this level of violence so soon after arriving. This place is definitely not for the faint-hearted. We're in Mexico City with Donal MacIntyre, and already we've seen that life is cheap and murder on the streets is an everyday occurrence. But this is a city of colour and contrast, where visitors are made to feel welcome and people know how to throw a party. Cause for celebration. Mexico is famous for its Day of the Dead festival, held every November on the Catholic holy days of All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day. Millions of people pay tribute to the dead at a ceremony which dates back thousands of years to the Aztec Indians. Perhaps this uniquely Mexican fascination with death is one of the reasons why murder and violence have always been out in the open in Mexico City. Riots, revolutions and violence seem to be in the Mexican DNA. In 1968, thousands of students protesting against the government were massacred by soldiers and police who opened fire on the unarmed civilians. The severe economic recession in the 1990s led to a massive increase in crime that saw Mexico City explode in lawlessness. Donal's meeting up with crime journalist Joan Grillo to find out more about the situation on the ground.
Just give us a flavour of Mexico City and crime.
Crime here really exploded in the 1990s. You've got a lot of forms of robbery or extortion, ways of getting money, carjacking, kidnapping for ransom. These kind of crimes are very common in Mexico City. The criminal organisations realise they can get away with it. Crime pays. In many cases, there's been many proven cases where police are working with organised crime.
This climate of corruption has given Latin America's most ruthless drug gangs freedom to ply their murderous trade on the streets of this city.
there's 4,000 drug-related murders in 1 year in Mexico. They want to send a message out. They want to show their rivals that we're going to kill you, often in very terrifying ways. Sometimes they'll kill the people, kill everyone around them as well. Sometimes they'll chop their heads off and put their heads with a note. Sometimes they'll kill them on video and put the video on the internet. So they kill them in a way to try and terrorize their enemies as well. But they also want to speak to the population, to the people. They want to speak to the street. And they want to tell the street, we're the guys running this show. You don't go to the police to talk about us, you give us information. They want to show they can kill anytime, any place, and get away with it.
Johan has taken Donal to a place in the heart of the city where a recent incident highlighted how the drug cartels seem free to kill anyone that opposes them.
Well, it was rush hour in November, and a Learjet plane came crashing right down onto the street. Exploded in flames, killed everyone on board and killed several people driving that day. And people walked on the street. And on board that plane was the number 2 in the government. He's the Interior Secretary. And also on board was a federal prosecutor called Jose Luis Santiago Vasconcelos, who was a very dedicated anti-crime fighter.
Although the plane crash was officially recorded as an accident, both of the high-ranking politicians on board were dedicated opponents of the cartels.
So explain the trajectory of the plane.
Obviously traffic, was immediately thrown all over the place. People were burnt up, came down a ball of flames, and then it carried on pushing through here with engines, wings thrown all over the place. So they started throwing stuff to this building here, and you can see from the building here where it's so boarded up now, where parts of the aircraft were thrown onto it.
It's incredible that a disaster of this scale could have been engineered by drug cartels, especially when it involved killing politicians in the public eye. Surely the gangsters here aren't powerful enough to take out a vice president.
Right now, in the climate Mexico is in, has been attacks on hundreds of police and soldiers this year. More than 500 police and soldiers across Mexico have been murdered this year by drug gangs. One guy, the head of the federal police, was shot dead by drug gangs in his own house. He went home, opened the door, there was a guy there with a gun, shot him dead in his house. In that kind of climate, something like this happens and everybody immediately thought, this is drug gangs or some kind of killing. That's the first thought that came to most Mexicans' head.
Who's running Mexico? It seems in a state of flux, a state of absolute chaos and violence.
We're talking about armed groups, organised crime, drug cartels with thousands of men at arms, using rocket-propelled grenades, AK-47s, AR-15s, bazookas. These guys have done more carnage than a lot of guerrilla uprisings. This is more violence than a lot of wars, so you get a real sense of the government has lost control here.
Donal is shocked to learn that the drug cartels have such a stranglehold over Mexico that the country appears to be sliding into total lawlessness. Mexico is the main supply route for cocaine and other drugs entering the United States. It's a huge business, which may go some way to explaining why the cartels are willing to go to such lengths to protect their business interests. As the cartels have grown in strength and influence, Mexico City has also witnessed the emergence of another criminal phenomenon, kidnapping. Kidnapping in Mexico City has now reached epidemic proportions. In 2007 alone, there were 1,028 kidnapping reports in Mexico. That's almost 3 a day. 65 of those victims were killed. Kidnappings in Mexico are organised crime operations motivated purely by money. Experts point to a link between the rise in kidnappings and the increasing gap that separates the rich and the poor. In a society like this, it is necessary for those with money to invest heavily to protect themselves from criminals. Donal is on his way to meet a man who's made a business out of providing rich people with security on the main streets of Mexico City. Francisco Ramirez is the head of an organization called CIOS.
Grupo CIO significa Centro de Información y Operaciones en Seguridad.
This company is one of the largest private security firms in Mexico City.
Desafortunadamente, por la situación que se vive en el país, el secuestro es una realidad. El secuestro hoy en día está incrementando, o sea, se ha incrementado la parte agresiva, la parte bárbara del secuestro. Ya en una época se tomó una modalidad que sale de México, que son las mutilaciones. Bandas especializadas formadas y entrenadas por el narcotráfico, su modo de vida es la ilegalidad, están entrenados para aspectos violentos y están girando a secuestrar. El hecho de que sean delincuentes novatos en el tema del secuestro genera el riesgo tan alto para la víctima.
El dormitorio.
Hechos más tristes y más lamentables, personas de la autoridad dedicadas a grupos de antisecuestro que terminaban siendo personas dedicadas al secuestro, que no es secreto, o sea, está en todos los medios de comunicación.
It's no surprise that these sorts of organizations do well, when people in Mexico City simply can't trust the police. In this climate, the kidnapping problem can only get worse. Donald's going to meet a young man who went through the horror of a kidnap ordeal and lived to tell the tale. Rodrigo Alvarez was approached by two men and seized at gunpoint whilst visiting a friend in this middle-class neighborhood.
I remember I raised my hands. They told me, don't raise your hands, don't raise your hands.
At that point, the kidnappers bundled Rodrigo into a car and drove off.
And they started asking me things like, how much do you think your family could pay for your life? Well, that's a question that I didn't know how to answer. Maybe they could pay 100,000 pesos. And he told me, okay, we would ask for 200,000.
Rodrigo was taken to a house in an unknown location. The kidnappers were going to ask for a ransom sum equivalent to 15,000 euros. He feared the worst.
They told me, okay, calm down, just don't do stupid things, don't try to escape, don't try to run away, and you're gonna be all right. They gave me food, but I didn't want to eat because my stomach at that point was shattered. It's a funny feeling because you kind of prepare in a way to be killed because you know that they can do it anytime.
Rodrigo's parents negotiated his release and paid the ransom.
When they told me that the ransom had been paid, well, I was glad. They told me, this is what you're going to do. We're going to take you in the car. We're going to leave you in some place. You're going to walk 100 steps. And you don't have to look back. Because if you look back, we're going to shoot you.
Despite their terrifying ordeal, Rodrigo and his family decided not to contact the authorities.
We never wanted to go to police, because I was free. You don't know if it's true that the police is ganged up with these guys, if they are connected in some way. We talked about it and we said we're not going to the police because you don't know if they're gonna take revenge on us.
We're with Donal MacIntyre in Mexico City, the kidnapping capital of the world, and we're getting a taste for how organised crime is terrorising the streets. Donal's shocked by what he's seen. It seems like a city spiralling out of control. Kidnapping is a big problem here, but an even bigger problem is the widespread corruption amongst the police that sees many crimes go unpunished. Donal's heard that the Mexican government has promised to tackle this issue, so he's on his way to meet the newly formed anti-kidnapping unit. These specially chosen cops are said to be incorruptible. If that's true, then they are in a minority amongst the Mexican police force. As he arrives at the police training ground, a press officer tells him about operations the unit will demonstrate in today's drill.
Aquí va a haber un secuestrado. Vamos a trabajar con sniper. Sí, va a ser a fuego real.
The team are well tooled up and the dummy hostage is brought in to be rescued. Donal's a bit surprised they're allowing him to stay so close to the action.
This exercise depends upon the accuracy of those snipers up there. They're going to take out the watchman over there and less than 7 meters away. So I don't know whether
Pablo?
With the kidnappers dealt with and the hostage safe, the simulated rescue is over.
That's noisy.
One of the officers has agreed to answer some of Donal's questions.
How do you protect your unit from infiltration from criminals?
Nosotros vivimos la mayor parte del tiempo en el trabajo en el grupo y nos vamos conociendo poco a poco. Y nos da un margen de saber quién es quién, y cuando vemos que alguien anda extraño, hablamos con él y en su caso lo retiramos del juego.
The anti-kidnapping unit put on a good show of strength and solidarity, but Donal's not sure how much of it was a PR display for his benefit. It's not clear whether they are making any real difference on the streets. Donal's going to talk to some British expats who have been living here for a while. As foreign nationals, they are perceived as being wealthy, so Sarah, a news reporter, and Hannah, a publishing editor, both take precautions against kidnapping.
I would never take a street taxi, because to have 3 English people in a car, all obviously foreign, is just more of a risk than myself going, speaking to them in Spanish.
Sarah and Hannah explain how unsuspecting foreign nationals are taken hostage after getting into fake taxis and then robbed at gunpoint.
They call them express kidnappings, and they normally last an hour. Because they stop at a cash point and ask them to take out what they can and do it with the different cards that they've got and give them the PIN number so that they can do it, so they can check that they're taking as much as possible.
This girl that I know that was taken away was a foreigner like us, and she was beaten up, just dumped in this remote area.
The next day, Donal is eager to find out more about express kidnappings and how they work. So he flags down the nearest cab, mindful that it could be driven by a potential kidnapper.
How big a problem is kidnapping in your life and in the life of people you know?
Sí, he conocido gente que se dedica al secuestro muy fuerte. Están aquí hasta 5 vehículos nuevos de taxi.
So people actually buy taxis and conduct a business just for Kidnap Express.
Al negocio de ese tipo de secuestro. Inclusive en 1 o 2 meses han ganado hasta 350,000 pesos. Son impresionantes. ¿Eh? Entonces, ahí está la clave de ellos.
If a random taxi driver knows people in his own neighbourhood running kidnapping operations, it shows just how widespread the problem is.
Are they fearsome people? Are they scary? Are they violent?
No, no con miedo, simplemente así que son conocidos de chicos y pues nada más el saludo. Como mismo ya los conocen, es el saludo. Para el barrio es el saludo de nosotros. Para los demás tal vez que sí, sean la amenaza para los demás.
From your experience, what percentage of kidnappings are ever reported to the police?
Como un 98% más o menos, que no se denuncian. O sea, son muy pocos los que van a denunciar ese tipo de personas. Por lo mismo, porque las mismas autoridades están corridos con ellos. Entonces, por eso la gente se evita de ir a denunciar. Porque la misma autoridad te dice, no vayas porque te conoce tu casa, te llega y te plomean y tú ya sabes, retira los cargos o tú le tiras, tú le sabes, ¿no?
Okay, well listen, thank you very much.
It seems that here in Mexico City, no one is safe from the kidnapping scourge. Donal has found out that it's not only the wealthy that are targeted. The poorer members of society are also at risk. Recent kidnaps have taken place with a ransom demand of as little as $200. Donal's heard about a recent case that shocked the city, the kidnapping of a 5-year-old boy by a teenage neighbour. Javier Betanzos was kidnapped and killed in one of the most deprived areas of Mexico City. There seemed to be no motive for the kidnapping. A local woman has agreed to speak to Donal.
Pues la verdad no les importa ya si eres rico o si eres pobre. Pero aquí el secuestro de este niño fue porque esta persona le dio mucho coraje que los papás del niño tenían un carrito y como ellos son comerciantes como nosotros, se compraron una camioneta. Entonces él pensó que yo creo que tenían más dinero y robó al niño para pedir.
The boy's family spent days looking for him. Finally, a witness to the abduction came forward, and both Javier and his teenage abductor were identified. Shockingly, the victim's relatives realized that his kidnapper was a 17-year-old friend of the family.
How did the community feel about that kidnapping?
Se sentía muy tenso el ambiente, incluso a cualquier hora del día están secuestrando a los niños y no nada más a niños, a gente grande, sin importarles nada. Si uno tiene dinero, si no tiene dinero.
Gabriela told Donal where he might find some of Javier's family, so he heads over there to see if they'll talk to him. When he arrives, the little boy's auntie is at home and willing to talk about his murder.
How do you feel towards the person who murdered your nephew?
Pues son personas que no merecen el perdón porque ni siquiera la muerte merecen, porque la muerte sería un halago para ellos, porque ellos como quiera ya destruyeron una familia psicológicamente, moralmente, en todos los aspectos destruyen una familia y más que fue un niño chiquito que no merecía esa muerte, se ensañó con ese niño. Porque le pusieron ácido correctivo, le inyectaron al niño.
It turned out that Javier's teenage kidnapper had been acting on behalf of a ruthless kidnapping gang. In a bid to make a terrifying name for themselves, the kidnappers murdered Javier by injecting him in the heart with battery acid.
Le inyectaron, usted se imagina, en vida, estarle inyectando ácido correctivo y estarse quemando por dentro a los 5 años y con eso. Es injusto.
Que se cuide. Espérate, no corres, ¿no?
all his years as a crime reporter, this is one of the most harrowing stories Donal has ever heard. It's unbelievable that in this city, children are being killed by their own neighbours. Donal's already been told that one of the reasons why so few kidnappings get reported is because victims are afraid that the police may be corrupt. In a society where no one can be trusted, Donal wants to know about the options available to those who have members of their family kidnapped. Donal is on his way to meet a man who felt he had no choice but to take the law into his own hands. In July 2000, Paula Gallo was abducted and killed by kidnappers. Her father, Eduardo, a wealthy business consultant, has agreed to meet Donal and tell him the full story of his family's horrifying ordeal.
Please, come inside.
What kind of person was she?
Well, she was a very happy girl. She loved to play jokes to anyone. She loved to make you laugh. This pieces of land.
Although Eduardo wasted no time in paying the $20,000 ransom, he never saw his daughter alive again.
She was shot with a .45 caliber gun in the neck. At least she died immediately. This was like I was going to say like a cold water bath, but that would be nothing compared to what I felt.
In the days after Paula's murder, the reasons why she was killed started to emerge. During the delivery of the ransom, the kidnappers themselves were robbed of half the money, and 3 of them were killed by unknown assailants. The remaining members of the gang killed Paula when they realised they didn't have the full ransom money. The police immediately assumed that Eduardo was behind the attack on the criminals.
They said, okay, Mr. Gallo, we're making an investigation. And in order to do our investigation, we would like you to explain us how those guys were dead. Maybe you have an idea. Well, I don't have an idea, and if you're meaning by having an idea that I killed him, you can all go. I was really angry. I lost my head. I started shouting them, yelling them, insulting them, and sending them where they should go.
You lost your temper because you just lost your daughter.
Mm-hmm. And they were trying to meant that I murdered the kidnappers, and because of that they killed my daughter. And I said, well, you're not only stupid, you're corrupt. In that moment is when I realized that they were not going to make an investigation.
Knowing that a number of the gang were still on the loose, Eduardo began to track down his daughter's killers.
I started collecting information like photographs, like information about their families, their sons, their wives, their brothers, their fathers, their cousins, where they lived, a lot of information. So I knew what I was looking, whom I was looking for, and then I understood that they were 4 missing, and I said, okay, well, let's find them.
Through his own investigations, Eduardo was able to find 3 of his daughter's kidnappers. They were immediately arrested by the police.
Then I continued looking for another one, who was the one who shot Paola. I found him in Estado de Mexico. I had only 2 bodyguards, so we did the job that was supposedly to be done by the authorities. We delivered this guy.
Even though the kidnappers were all convicted, Eduardo still regularly checks to ensure that they haven't bribed their way out of prison.
From time to time, I like to go to prison in order to be sure they're there. It has to be done in Mexico. Maybe in other country not, but in Mexico you have to be sure that things are kept the way they should.
Check to make sure they're still in jail, because it's Mexico, you never know.
Mm-hmm.
What satisfaction does it give you that you actually managed to solve your daughter's crime?
Well, it's not a matter of satisfaction. It's only a matter of having justice. And also it's a way of telling, even she cannot hear me, but it's a way of saying, Paula, I love you.
Donal MacIntyre is in Mexico City. He's discovered that life is cheap and death is a celebrated part of the culture. This is a city ravaged by crime and corruption, where kidnapping has become so common that the poor are abducting and murdering their own neighbours. Donal knows that his investigation won't be complete until he meets some kidnappers. He's come to the largest prison in Mexico where one has agreed to talk. Filiberto Vargas is now serving 60 years for allowing his home to be used by a gang to hold a victim hostage.
11,500 prisoners are in here, including Filiberto, the kidnapper. He's part of a gang who kidnapped and raped a young woman, and he's here and he's going to tell us his side of the story.
Donal is led out to a yard where Filiberto is waiting to meet him.
What brought a pensioner like you to commit this crime?
Pues no tenía necesidad, como vulgarmente se dice, no, pero quería comprarme mi carrito, un taxi, para tener un poquito, supuestamente, más.
How much ransom did you demand from the family of the victim?
No, yo de eso soy ajeno a todo eso, porque yo nomás era de darle de comer a la persona. Supuestamente me iban a dar 50,000 pesos.
During the court case, the kidnapped victim revealed that she had been repeatedly raped during the time she was held hostage.
When did you find out that she had been raped?
Hasta que tuve yo detenido ahí, o sea, en la delegación contaba con los judiciales, cuando me lo nombraron ellos, porque me inculcaban a mí supuestamente la violación a la persona, el cual yo lo negué rotundamente y jamás he tenido contacto con la dama ni no.
Is that true? You're in jail, you're serving 60 years. You can tell the truth now.
Sí. Yo nomás, el roce era con el que la cuidaba. Yo contacto con ella no tenía, yo nomás hablaba con ella.
But you must have heard her noise, her talking, her screams, her crying.
A mí me sacaban del domicilio o me mandaban a traer, ¿cómo se llama? Refrescos o antojos, golosinas. Sí, yo no, ¿para qué no? Nunca lo oía.
You're an intelligent man. You read the newspapers. Every day you hear the impact of kidnapping on people, the human tragedy on themselves. You must have known the woman in your house you were feeding was going through hell.
Pues ya no puedo hacerme para atrás. No, sí arrepentido de todo, ¿no? Porque pues, eso es avaricia, ¿no? Ya tenía lo que bien, la libertad y un pequeño de dinero que tenía, ¿no? Y ahora, pues no.
Donal's left wondering whether to believe Filiberto when he says he knew nothing about the rape, but it does seem clear he wasn't the leader. The reality is that Filiberto was just a small cog in a big machine. The leaders of the gang that he was involved with are still on the loose because they have the money and connections to pay off the authorities. Since Donal has been here, he's witnessed how the culture of corruption has spread throughout Mexico City. Kidnappings and other crimes often go unpunished. The rule of law in Mexico is weak, which sends out a message that crime pays. As long as Mexico remains a country where rich and powerful criminals can operate beyond the law, then organised crime will continue to hold a deadly grip over the capital, making Mexico City one of the world's toughest towns.
I'm in Odessa, the Ukraine's pearl of the Black Sea. It's considered to be one of the most criminal ports in the world. This beautiful Mediterranean-style city hides a dark and brutal side. One of Odessa's greatest attractions is its women. Internet bridal agencies are big business here, but as I've already found out, many brides-to-be are just out to scam money out of male tourists. Even in the middle of winter, when the temperature drops to below zero, the men still come in hope of finding a wife. I'm on my way to a traditional Ukrainian steam room, or banyar, to meet one such man.
Oh, shit.
45-year-old American Barry, a company manager from Indiana with 2 failed marriages behind him, is going to introduce me to the woman he hopes one day to marry, 19-year-old Katerina. She doesn't speak any English, so all their conversations are conducted through her translator. Barry and Katerina met just 9 days ago.
We've gone on a few dates since then, and it seems with each date that passes, we grow a little closer to each other. And one of the most interesting things that happened, it was on our very first date when we were having dinner. There were moments in our meeting when we did not need the services of an interpreter. There was points where the communication flowed just very naturally. Even though she was speaking in Russian and I was speaking in English, there was a connection beginning.
What do you hope for you as a couple?
I hope that Ekaterina will one day accept my proposal of marriage and join me in the United States to form a family.
Has it surprised you how well you've yourself and Barry have connected?
Не могу сказать, что сильно удивила. She can say that she was very surprised because she felt some connection through the letters. It was a pleasant communication. It was a pleasant confirmation of the letters when she met him in person.
And would it be part of your dream to move and live in the U.S.?
Хотела, это было бы твоей мечтой переехать и жить.
Я не уверена, но неважно, как бы где жить, главное с кем.
She's not sure about her move to US. It is not important where to live. It is important with whom to live.
There's always the risk, Barry, that you could be disappointed or scammed, or people like you're very vulnerable. So are you comforted by the fact that Katerina is also looking for love?
Yes, and I actually believe that I understood this about her beforehand. I know that there's always the possibility that somebody could have ulterior motives. But I believe that Ekaterina is a very honest and sincere person, and I have great faith that in her as far as being sincere with me. I truly believe my missing half is in this part of the world, and with each date that I spend with Ekaterina, I begin to feel more and more that she is that missing half of my soul.
I think if I went... Of course. You can see how easy it is to fall for these scams. Barry hears what he wants to hear, and the girls create a false sense of intimacy, and it's compounded by the language barrier. I kind of feel for Barry, because I think all the ingredients are there to set him up for a fall. All the ingredients of a scam are there. Is it a scam? Well, we can't know for sure. He's not quite the innocent. He's been married twice. He's been in the Navy. He's been a roadie. So he's not entirely naive, although there is a lovely innocence about him. And I'd hate to think that the most predictable thing is going to happen to him, that he's going to end up scammed and steamed and disappointed. But crime in Odessa goes much deeper than wife scamming. The Russian mafia has a vice-like grip on the city that dates back to the end of Soviet occupation. When the Soviet Union left the Ukraine in 1991, it left a power vacuum and a country on its knees. Its army left 1.5 million tons of conventional munitions behind that it couldn't afford to ship back to Russia. This is one of the biggest abandoned arms stockpiles in history and will take the Ukraine government 50 years to destroy. Many of these weapons, poorly guarded or stolen, have disappeared into the black market, estimated to be half of the Ukraine's GDP. In its first 6 years of independence, the Ukraine saw $57 billion worth of ex-Soviet weapons disappear. These weapons have been linked to some of the bloodiest conflicts and most notorious governments in the world. The regime of Saddam Hussein, Somalian militias, and even the Taliban have benefited from the lax security in the Ukraine. The illegal weapons trade is shrouded in secrecy. It's controlled by organized crime bosses who have successfully eluded prosecution by the Ukrainian government. With such vast sums of money at stake, corruption is reputed to be endemic here. Just outside of Odessa is the notorious 7-kilometer market, a hodgepodge of lorries, containers and market stalls that was built up around counterfeit goods. It's Europe's biggest market and it's rumored to turn over $20 million a day. People travel hundreds of miles from all over the country to buy goods here. And I'm told you can buy anything you want, from fake Gucci handbags to submachine guns. We've had to keep our camera hidden for obvious reasons. But it's not long before we find what we're looking for. It's legal to own firearms in the Ukraine, but I'm astonished at the firepower on offer. And even the smallest category of gun has the potential to be lethal.
А на покупку этого оружия лицензия никакая не нужна.
You do not need the license to buy these guns. They belong to the sports armory category. And you do not need permission as they are not regarded as self-defense. You can use real bullets with them. That's not legal.
Уже карается законом, да.
I asked his shop assistant if he sells gas guns, a police gun made to fire CS gas, but often smuggled into the UK and altered to take live bullets.
Gas guns belong to the traumatic category, therefore you need a license for the purchase and selling. We don't have it. But if you need it, we can sort it out.
Some of these guns date back to the early 1900s and have been used in several wars, like this Soviet-issued German Mauser from the 1920s. Many of them are deactivated so that they can only fire blanks, and some are replicas, exact copies of real guns. Because it's legal to own blank-firing weapons in the EU, these are often sold to foreign collectors. But British police are gravely concerned about the amount of them making their way from the Ukraine into the hands of UK street gangs, and the ease by which they're converted by backstreet gunsmiths to fire live rounds. They estimate that at least 150,000 deactivated guns are in circulation. While I'm in the store, I find an old Soviet-issue World War I Smith & Wesson, similar to the British Army version that killed 11-year-old Rhys Jones in Odessa's twin city of Liverpool. For $330, this is what we can get. It's a weapon similar to this that was involved in the Rhys Jones case, that with a little bit of tampering can become a very effective and very much the real thing with real consequences. Guns are in pretty easy supply here. And sources have told us that for a small cash bribe, we can smuggle this gun through Moldova, 30 miles away, and into Western Europe. I've already discovered guns are everywhere, but I need to know how such a deadly trade can be allowed to flourish in what seems like such a beautiful and peaceful town. But to do that, I need to speak to someone who knows this town inside out. Odessa is home to many English expats who live here all year round. And despite it being the middle of winter, I have found just the man. Gary has been here for 2.5 years. He runs a nightclub, is in tight with the locals, and knows just how this town works. He should be able to give me the inside word on Odessa. What brought you to Odessa?
I don't know why. It's probably economical climate. You've seen what it's like in England, and you've seen what it's like here. And you get 5 months of glorious sunshine in summer here, or you can have a week in England.
Is it a safe city for tourists?
Yes, it is. In the city centre, it's very safe. There's a big police presence in the city centre, and they do rely on tourism here, so they look after the tourists. I've been here 2.5 years, never had a problem. It's going to be the Eastern Bloc Costa del Sol, literally.
Since Spain and the UK signed an extradition treaty, British criminals have started moving into the Ukraine. This city is home to 1 million people, and when the tourists arrive for the summer, that number almost doubles. Amazingly, there are barely any reported crimes against tourists in Odessa. With the city centre only 1 mile wide, people walk its boulevards in almost complete safety any time of day and night. But looks can be deceiving. Safe cities aren't always the way they seem. It often means a much more sinister force is at work. Is corruption a big problem here? It seems to be that salaries for police and judges and politicians are so low, it seems ripe for it.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of corruption here, but at least it's up front. We know it goes on here.
The average wage in the Ukraine is only $200 a month. Unsurprisingly, corruption here is endemic. And amazingly, the majority of the Ukrainians accept that corruption is the way to get things done. What's it like to do business here?
It's very hard to do business here. You've got to be streetwise, not a businessman, but streetwise. You've got to look at your bribery, your corruption, everything else. Before you even think about even opening a business, really look into it. You've got to have a roof, somebody taking care of you, especially if you're a Westerner. It's somebody who looks after you to make sure you get no problems, no hassles, things like that.
How do you arrange for your protection?
There's plenty of people who will offer protection, but you've got to make sure you've got the right protection. And it's basically listening to people, talking to people, and finding out the best people who can take care of you and look after you. Else you can get problems.
What kind of problems? Intimidation, guns,
Yeah, well, you can get intimidation, yeah. Your business is doing well, they will try and take it off you.
It's no surprise that the threats are serious because guns are readily available. Guns and gangsters go hand in hand, and I'm about to find out that in Odessa, it seems that gangsters are particularly ruthless. I'm in Odessa, a city ruled by a menacing underworld. Formerly part of the USSR, the Soviets may have left Odessa, but the Russians are still here, in the form of gangsters. Corruption is rife here. Studies reveal that the majority of businesses make unofficial payments to public officials. Those involved at the top end of corruption will stop at nothing to keep it hidden from scrutiny, especially when it comes to discussing the illegal arms trade. And with the entire city believed to be run by the Russian mafia, we have been warned that the consequences of digging too deep could be fatal. Journalists who have dared to write about public corruption or the role of gangsters in the economy have suffered terrible consequences.
Journalists are a very good target. They are in the public eye, so killing or beating or making people from the journalism profession disappear was to give a signal to the entire society that we are still there. we still control the situation, or at least we are not going away as easy as you would like us to.
Journalists asking unwanted questions have been dealt with ruthlessly. In just 10 years, 13 reporters died unnaturally in the Ukraine. Many more have been given signals. Odessan investigative journalist Alexander Levitt has been sent a signal for writing critical pieces about the local authorities and their connections with shadowy businessmen. Alexander, how difficult is it for journalists to operate in this city, in this country?
To my great sorrow, it is very difficult to be a journalist in this country. It is very dangerous.
Walking home from work one night, Alexander was beaten up in this playground.
It was dark. The weather was like it is today. I was hit on the head from behind. I fell down, but I managed to rise a bit. I was able to see the people who were beating me. Then they started to kick me.
Despite his beating, Alexander continued writing, but a year later, things took a turn for the worse.
I was on a work trip to Kiev. I received a phone call in the editor's office saying that my apartment was completely destroyed by a fire. Both my very old parents were inside.
Thankfully, Alexander's parents survived, but the trauma sent his mother to an early grave. At least Alexander is still alive to tell the tale. In 1997, the editor of a local Odessa newspaper, Boris Derevienko, was not so lucky. He was shot and killed on a city street in broad daylight on his way to work. He was a known critic of the local government's ties with the underworld. Alexander is in no doubt as to why he'd been targeted.
I am confident and indeed sure it is because of the number of critical articles I have written in the local Odessan newspaper. I was told this directly when I was beaten. I have also been told that if I continue to write, I will be killed. They were not brave enough to kill me, but they destroyed my whole family.
But these risks are just part of the job of being a journalist in the Ukraine.
I am continuing to write in the same way as I have written in the past. I will continue to ask these unpleasant questions and will continue to do so until I die. Let's say it's like this. I can't be stopped by these scare tactics.
Unless you're a tourist, it seems no one in this city is immune from the mafia's fearsome rule. Sid, a British expat who recently ran poker clubs with his business partner in the Ukraine, soon found out how things work in the city.
You don't fuck with them, because if you do, they're going to give you a slap. That's the first thing you get. It's a good slap. And then, boom, goodbye, you're gone. My pal had a problem, but he didn't think it was a problem. And he got shot 3 times. But they shot him, but it didn't kill him. So yeah, you can't mess. You can't fuck around. Because life is worth nothing. Life is worth nothing then. Absolutely worth it.
The Odessan mafia have a lot to protect, and asking questions about arms smuggling is very dangerous. So far, it's been impossible to find anyone who will talk. Until now. A very successful businessman is willing to meet us at Odessa's grandest hotel. Well, I'm about to meet a guy called Alex. He's a very, very connected guy in this city. I'm told he can unlock the secrets of this place for me, and he is ex-KGB, and is very, very, very powerful. And I've been told that I have to give him great respect and great deference. This is his city, his town, And we're very much at a place here, so I'm going to obey by all of those rules. Alex.
Добрый день.
Thank you very much for seeing us. Great. We'll sit down here and we'll talk over here. Thank you very much. Fantastic. Alex, how big is the black market economy in Odessa?
Значит, черная экономика есть.
The black economy exists, and it is flourishing in Odessa.
And how about the black market in guns and weapons? Because, of course, the Ukraine has a large stockpile in ex-Soviet weapons.
Ну, то, что касается
On the black market, you can buy all types of weapons. For example, starting from the ordinary weapons called starter weapons, more for respect, then weapons to harm anybody, then to the big number, real military weapons.
And has it been quite a problem, the export of illicit guns out of the Ukraine through Odessa?
This is a real problem. Guns are indeed exported through neighbor countries, and there are people who can arrange it.
And is there big business in that, and is there big money to be made exporting the illegal guns through Odessa?
Ну, конечно.
There is no need to discuss this, as the answer is obvious.
The KGB trained this man. It's no surprise he won't reveal much. Many of the world's most notorious weapons dealers are connected with Odessa, and they don't like people who talk. In 2001, Italian police busted millionaire Odessan gangster Leonid Minin in a hotel room full of prostitutes and cocaine. The police discovered incriminating documents that led Minin to be charged with international gun smuggling and shipping 13 tons of arms to the Ivory Coast and 68 tons to Burkina Faso. In 2008, a man widely linked to the Odessan mafia, Victor Bout, dubbed the Merchant of Death by a British politician, was arrested for the sale of millions of dollars worth of armaments in Colombia. Many of these shipments were thought to have come through Odessa.
Что необходимо делают, но просто есть такие...
There are structures that protect this kind of smuggling.
Like what?
I don't want to talk about it, because I know too much.
And does the tourist industry fund the black market industry?
Ну, где-то...
Well, part of it, yes. There is a share.
And in what way does that happen?
There are too many details. We don't need to go into it.
The KGB trained this guy well. He isn't going to implicate himself or anyone else. I am all too aware of what happens to journalists who pry too deeply. I decide to leave it there before I get a warning. Organized crime is only interested in making money, not helping the poor. While Odessa's gangsters enjoy the fruits of their ill-gotten gains beneath the city's apparent oasis of calm, Odessa hides a terrible secret. Away from the eyes of tourists, hundreds of homeless street kids live underneath Odessa's most beautiful buildings. Abandoned by their families, the authorities, and the businesses above them, they are left to live in appalling conditions. Most are addicted to glue, and many of them have HIV. Robert is a church minister from the US. After visiting Odessa and learning about the street kids, he gave up everything to come and help them. He now runs a charity that clothes, feeds, and monitors the health of these children with what little resources he can scrape together. He relies on donations, but receives no help from the authorities or the city's power brokers.
It's very easy. Glue is about 3 hryvnias, I think, 3 or 4 hryvnias. so it's not even $1. They beg. They go into the streets with a cup, usually like a McDonald's cup, and they'll sit there and beg for change. And they can make, I don't know, $3, $4, maybe $5 a day begging. If it's they take, sometimes it seems like the littlest kid, you know, and put him out there to raise money for the whole group. And then they use that money to buy glue.
Today is Artur's birthday.
У тебя сегодня день рождения. А сколько тебе лет? 13. А ты давно тут живешь? Месяц?
Брат, сколько лет на улице?
Я года 2.
Сколько?
2 года.
2 года. He's been 2 years on the streets, living different places.
А ты из Одессы сам?
Я в Ведёпольской области, город Одесса, Великодолинская.
А ты тут уже подружился с кем-то, с ребятами?
Много людей.
Occasionally the kids will steal a mobile phone, which allows them to barter for things. But as Artur has found, it comes at a cost.
Слушай, а что у тебя за синяк там? Что упал?
Это ударили, телефон забрали.
На улице тебя чужие кто-то, или вы просто подрались?
Чужие.
А за что?
Просто ударили, телефон забрали.
Это часто случается?
Когда есть телефон, часто. Когда нет, не очень.
Robert has appealed to people with money in Odessa to help, but it seems the city wants to ignore the problem. Trying to prevent kids from living such miserable lives should be easier than this. But Odessa is no ordinary city.
In a city like Odessa, the issue is trust. Once I asked a radio producer, is there a man in Odessa that people would trust with this kind of money? We're talking about 500,000 or 600,000 euros to fund a program like that. Well, the response was, there is no such man.
It's a cruel irony that finds street kids living in squalor directly beneath Odessa's banks. But it's testimony to this messed up society that these kids can live in squalor because there are no services to help them. I'm in Odessa, Ukraine's popular coastal tourist destination. Hundreds of thousands of visitors come from all over the world to sample its summer sun and beautiful sights. All the statistics show that tourists are perfectly safe here.
I've been here 2.5 years, never had a problem.
And that's because the crime in this city goes on at a much higher level. Alex, an ex-KGB man who's very well connected in this city, has left me no doubt that there are questions I shouldn't ask.
I don't want to talk about it because I know too much.
The day after meeting him, I get a phone call from Alex saying he wants to take me on a tour. He won't tell me where. He said it was a surprise. After yesterday's encounter, it might be wise not to turn him down. Eventually, Alex tells me he's taking me to the tomb of Odessa's most respected and legendary mobster. I'm being granted a rare, if odd, honor. As we're going to visit the grave of a major mobster, even in death they command respect, perhaps even more respect than in life. So we have to bring our little token, no matter his deeds among the living. It seems bizarre that the best kept and most revered grave in this cemetery is a gangster's, who's up to his neck in human trafficking, drugs, and gun smuggling. But that's a good indication of the principles this city operates on. When the Russian mafia took hold of the Ukraine in the 90s, Odessan mobster Viktor Kulevar, or Karabas, refused to give up his patch. Legend paints him as a Robin Hood type figure who ruled Odessa through trust rather than violence.
This was a man who took decisions about everything related to the town. He was involved in the hidden economy. He collected taxes from everybody who was involved in business. Generally, he was a normal person and never insulted anybody.
I've met enough gangsters to know you don't earn that kind of respect without being utterly ruthless. But Alex seems determined to romanticize the man.
He was a peaceful man with a positive attitude towards people. He wasn't your typical ruthless gangster. Even more than that, people would ask him for help when the authorities were not treating them fairly. He had a lot of power in every level and structure of the town.
But Karabas had something everybody else wanted: control over Odessa's lucrative oil and weapons trade.
He always loved to go to the steam rooms here in Odessa. But one lovely morning, he came out from the steam room and a man appeared with a Kalashnikov and he was shot and killed.
After his assassination in 1997, the bodies started piling up. Odessa suddenly found itself overrun by what's known as the Third Force, a frightening cocktail of oligarchs, ex-KGB agents, and gangsters.
In one day, there was transformation of power in the city.
The city had changed forever. How big was his funeral?
We can even say tens of thousands. Everybody wanted to come and bury this man and pay their respects.
The people of this city are nostalgic for a time when Ukrainians, not Russians, ran Odessa. But those times are long gone. Odessa is a beautiful city, but I've discovered that its grandeur is a facade that disguises a grim reality of poverty and corruption. Organized crime has got its roots deep into Odessa, to such an extent that corruption is now an accepted part of society. The crime bosses have grown rich and powerful by the trade in women, drugs, and illegal weapons. Journalists who dare to publish the level of corruption in Odessa and the grip that the gangsters have on politicians risk being killed. Until the Ukrainian government delivers respect for the rule of law for its people, the situation in Odessa will only get worse before it gets better.
Donal MacIntyre, investigative journalist best known for his fearless work confronting dangerous criminal organisations, is on a mission to uncover the modern face of international crime. Travelling with him to some of the world's best-known cities, we'll meet members of the criminal underworld, police and local residents to discover what life is really like in the world's toughest times. We're in Istanbul, a beautiful city with a dark secret.
With the barrel.
Where billions of dollars of drug money is funding terrorism.
There was just nothing there. You couldn't believe that anybody or anything could have survived.
English, no problem, I can't see.
Donald's in Istanbul to uncover the secrets of the heroin trade. Istanbul is a city that bridges 2 continents and 2 cultures. Its geographical placement makes it an obvious doorway to the mystical East. It also has a growing reputation as the world's newest party destination. But Donal's here to uncover the darker secrets lurking beneath the city's friendly facade. Istanbul is at the geographical heart of the heroin trade. Its unique location enables Turkish gangs to act as a conduit for the drug. From the poppy fields in Afghanistan to the streets of major European cities. A trade that has links with football hooliganism and suicide bombings. Donal is here to find out why the famous gateway to the east has become a major drugs corridor to the west. He's also going to uncover the link between drugs and international terrorism. Istanbul is one of Turkey's largest cities, home to over 12 million people. East and west are separated by the Bosphorus, the strait that connects the Black Sea to the Sea of Marmara and literally splits the city in 2. But it's not just the Bosphorus that splits Istanbul in 2. There is an intense football rivalry in the city, and extreme groups on either side act as breeding grounds for Istanbul's criminal underworld. Donal is meeting with Okan Altıparmak, a renowned Turkish football historian and Istanbul resident. Okan's a passionate fan of Fenerbahce. At a recent Fenerbahce-Galatasaray game, Okan and his friend experienced firsthand the violent lengths some fans are prepared to go to in the name of their team.
We came out of a match, he was a Fenerbahce fan. We were walking out and he was telling me how much he hates Galatasaray fans. And in front of us there were some young Fenerbahce fans walking. And one of them turns around and says, "Hey, I'm a Galatasaray fan." And the guy says, "Well, I'm not talking about you, I'm talking to my friends. Just turn around and leave." And then they got into a fight. We did not see a knife or anything. We pulled our friend, we went and we started drinking beers. 45 minutes later, a friend of ours came. And he goes, "Man, you're bleeding." As it turns out, the guy was stabbed 7 times.
Knife crime is a problem in Istanbul, and this kind of attack is not uncommon.
80% of the Turkish public is living below the poverty line. Young people carry knives around because it's the easily available weapon, and people are so prone to violence in Istanbul. So let's say the low classes, they have a tendency to carry a lot of knives.
The combination of knife crime, organised violence and poverty lead Donal to suspect that there might be more to hooliganism than just passion for a football team. Following his instincts, Donal meets with Gareth Jenkins, a journalist who's lived in Istanbul for 20 years. He's written about Istanbul's football hooligans and has an insight into how they operate.
In Turkey, for the groups, really it's their whole life. They start off when they're very young. When they get into their early teens, they're allowed to effectively run with the group. Once they've proved themselves, and proving themselves means not just able to fight, being able to respond to orders, being able to apply tactics, then they're given a knife. In order to become a fully paid-up member of the group, they have to perform what's called a bursa, which involves plunging a knife, the blade of which is about 30 centimeters long, into the buttocks of a member of the opposing group. They plunge in the knife and twist it and then pull out the knife. When they've done that, then they become a fully paid-up member.
This is more than just fighting for the honour of your team. Based on an established hierarchy, these groups are a proving ground for those who are willing to kill.
When honour is involved, there are 2 ways that they execute a member of an opposing group. It's a knife straight through the heart or into the back and slashing across the back to destroy the liver. All of the hardcore groups in Turkey are associated with the Turkish underworld. In many cases, or in nearly all cases, their day job really is working for the members of the Turkish mafia, collecting protection money, fencing stolen goods. Some of them are doing a little bit involved in the narcotics trade. It's part of the whole structure of the way organised crime works. When people are no longer young enough and strong enough to be a football hooliganism, they can kind of move up the chain of command and get into other forms of organised crime.
It's clear that in Istanbul, football hooliganism is connected to other more serious criminal activity. This is how organised crime in Istanbul recruits its members. And as with most organised crime, drugs are never far from the picture. Because of its location, Istanbul is one of the world's biggest transit hubs for heroin. The drugs that pass through the city have arrived fresh from the mountains of Afghanistan. But drugs aren't the only thing passing through Istanbul. Islamic extremism is making its mark on the city too. We're with Donal MacIntyre in Istanbul, a remarkable and unique city, but one which is used by gangs to traffic heroin. But these gangs don't just control the cross-border heroin trade. They are also involved in supplying the estimated 4 million drug users across Turkey. The mafia in Istanbul have long had an influence on the nightclub scene in and around Taksim Square, dealing their drugs and scamming unsuspecting visitors attracted by the bright lights and beautiful ladies.
In the 80s, people were afraid to come down here. It was basically gangsters and these clubs that would rip you off. It was strictly tourist traps. You know, sit down with a Russian girl, have one drink, and get a $5,000 bill, pay up, or get stabbed.
Mafia-sponsored dealers offer protection to the club owners and in return get to sell to the thousands of young people who flock here for a good night out.
You do have to worry about mafia and protection rackets, and I won't name his name, but I just spoke with the club owner about this. I said, what do you do about that? He said, what we do is we corner one drug dealer and we make him the club drug dealer. You'll see most of the good clubs have quite a few bouncers. And you need somebody, one of the managers needs to have some kind of dialogue with the mafia, unfortunately, to keep them at bay.
Like many of Europe's major cities, organised crime has made itself a home here. Away from the popular tourist destinations, some of Istanbul's outer suburbs are definitely not for the faint-hearted.
2/3 of Istanbul actually live in shantytown areas. There are some very, very dangerous neighborhoods. They are not in the guidebooks, they are not in the paper. There are two places which are called Dolapdere and Tarlabaşı. There's lots of drug dealing going on in Dolapdere and Tarlabaşı area. Also, there are gangs of petty crimes like theft, pickpocketing, and they live as families in that neighborhood. It can be dangerous. I've never been there myself in the evening. Actually, personally, I've been there only twice. And I'm not going to say I was shivering, I was so scared, but you could see that there's threat there. It's a very dangerous part of the town.
But instead of relying on hearsay, Donal decides to find out the truth about Istanbul's main streets for himself. He's meeting someone who lives in one of its tougher neighbourhoods. Leaving the relative safety of the city, he travels out to one of the more notorious suburbs.
We have come across one character. Don't know quite what he's going to say, but he's promised to tell us how the city runs and who's running it.
We were told that the man Donal is meeting was involved in one of Istanbul's hooligan gangs. And after hearing about their reputation, Donal's anxious to get the meeting over and done with. The contact arrives late, but reacts nervously to the camera. Donal has to handle him carefully to get what he has come for.
Just how big a presence are the mafia and the criminal entities in Istanbul?
Var yani her şey mafyanın elinde sonuçta. Ne bileyim yani gece kulübü işletenlerin şeyine kadar publar, şeyler ellerinde yani insanların. Bu bir gerçek.
How much drugs come through Istanbul on the way to the west?
Olsun buradan yapıldığı söyleniyor. Paraların nereye gittiği belli. Kimlerin bundan işte çıkar sağladığı belli. Bir tek uyuşturucu kaçakçılığı da değil bu iş. Yani bunun arkasında silah kaçakçılığı da var.
Some people must be making millions and millions of euros and dollars from the drug trade, and they must be building big houses and having big yachts. Is Istanbul one of those places which benefits from the profits of drugs?
Bazı şeyler var, yani bir tabu olmuş. Onun dışına çıkamıyorsun. Kısa sürede baktığın zaman bazı şirketler var birdenbire yükseliyorlar. Dediğin gibi milyon dolarlar kazanıyorlar. Ve paranın nereden geldiği belli değil.
It's obvious that organised crime is deeply enmeshed in the fabric of Istanbul. But this contact won't go into more detail. Donal's determined to get to the bottom of how Istanbul has become exploited by criminal gangs.
Well, the ancient call to prayer has been heard on these streets for centuries. These streets have also been part of the great ancient Silk Route, a route that transported spices and textiles from the Far East and the Orient on the way to the West. Now the route's the same, but the goods are very different. International terrorism and drugs.
Istanbul is the only city in the world to lie across two continents. Formerly known as Constantinople, it was the capital of the Ottoman Empire, an empire that ruled over much of the Middle East, North Africa and Eastern Europe. It was one of the major trading posts along the Silk Road, the old trading route from the Far East to Europe. At the end of the First World War, the mighty Ottoman Empire was finally defeated, and in 1923, under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, the modern Turkish Republic was born. The new republic bridged the continents of Europe and Asia, having Greece and Bulgaria to the west and Iran and Iraq to the east. Its mountainous eastern borders are very hard to police, which makes the area very popular with drug smugglers.
What is the history of Istanbul's involvement in the drug trade?
Up until the 1990s, most of the opium used to be brought in and then refined in the shanty towns around Istanbul. And then they would, for example, most of it was being trucked, a lot of it still is being trucked into Europe. Most of the heroin coming through Turkey starts off somewhere like Afghanistan.
Afghanistan produces most of the world's opium. Under the Taliban's strict regime, the cultivation of opium was outlawed. But in 2001, after the 9/11 attacks and subsequent US invasion, everything changed. The country was left in disarray, allowing poppy production to soar. Over 800,000 kilos of heroin were produced in Afghanistan in 2007. That's a street value of over 20 billion euros. In simple terms, that's 90% of the world's heroin supply.
It's smuggled across Iran and then through eastern Turkey to Istanbul, and from Istanbul into Europe.
The role of Istanbul as a transit point for drugs from east to west, is that something you've investigated and reported on before?
Well, for reasons of self-preservation, the issues of heroin smuggling doesn't tend to get a lot of coverage in the Turkish media. To be honest, it's quite a dangerous thing to try to investigate with anybody who's living here. So I've looked at it, but you have to be very careful. Organised crime, particularly in Istanbul, is very powerful. And a journalist is not going to have any protection if he goes after the drug barons.
When it comes to drugs, organised crime has a stranglehold on the city, and a pervasive climate of fear stops journalists digging too deeply. What is clear is that there are huge amounts of heroin flowing through Istanbul. And out of the estimated 4 million drug users in Turkey, it's thought that 1 million live in this city.
on our way to meet an unnamed contact who's asked not to be identified, but he's going to give us a real insight into the drug trade in this city and in this country. That's what we've been promised. Just have to wait and hear what he's got to say.
Donal's travelling to back streets only a stone's throw away from the bright lights of Taksim Square, but it feels like a million miles from Clubland. He's come here to meet a former addict who's not willing to reveal his identity because of his contacts within the underworld.
How tough are the streets of Istanbul?
Ya hayır, yani sürekli uyuşturucuyla ilgili, ne bileyim işte kız kardeşinin kötü yola düşmesiyle ilgili, ne bileyim hırsızlıkla ilgili. Tabii ki bazı olaylar oluyor. Onu vuruyor, o onu bıçaklıyor, o onu yaralıyor. Nedir, o onun uyuşturucusunu salmış, o onun parasını çalmış, ne bileyim.
Like most cities, residents of Istanbul are affected by the problems of addiction. Alongside these, Istanbul faces the problems caused by the local mafia, who have a profound effect on the city's communities.
How ruthless are the drug dealers in this city and in Turkey?
Zorunludur. Kendi kardeşini öldürebilecek kadar. Sokaklar hep bu işleri yapan insanlarla dolu. Bu insanların karnı doyuyor.
Although some members of Istanbul's poorest communities turn to dealing to survive, the mafia bosses hold the real power.
Who's made their fortunes out of drugs in this city?
Kim çıkar gördü? Kaçakçılar çıkar gördü. Bence en büyük olay silah tüccarları gördü bundan faydayı. Çünkü uyuşturucunun parası bir yerlere gidiyor. Nereye gidiyor? Buyurun aşağıda Afganistan, öbür tarafta Pakistan. Oradan buraya geliyor. Buradan kalkıyor Avrupa'ya gidiyor. Bunların her bir yerden geçişlerine bir paralar ödeniyor. Bu paralar nereye gidiyor? Türkiye'deki olan insanlar çok zengin oluyor, aşırı zengin oluyor.
Is there one big families, crime families, that kind of run this city and that kind of manage the illegal exports in the ports and other illegal activities, including the supply of drugs and weapons into the city?
Var tabii, yani bunu Türkiye geneli biliyor. Benim isim vermeme gerek yok, bunu Türkiye biliyor, bunu dünya biliyor. Türkiye'deki uyuşturucu trafiğini, büyük trafiğini yönetenler doğulu insanlar.
The big family, the big Turkish family we hear in London is the Babassans.
Demek istemediğim o söyledi. Az evvel söylemek istemediğim isim oydu. Benim hayatım hiç sorun değil. Bir tane oğlum var. Hayatını garanti altına alsınlar.
The one name, which is unmentioned name, which came out of a family who are perhaps the biggest drug family in this city and in this country, and therefore one of the biggest drug families in the world, the whole world of drug dealing and drug export, and the name is Babasan.
The Babasans are feared in Istanbul, so much so that even a former drug addict won't speak their name. The Babasans come from Lis, a small town in southeastern Turkey, an area notorious for its connection to drug trafficking.
When you talk about the Babasans, I mean, a lot of people will quake in fear and refuse to say anything about them. I mean, you know, you have a situation where you've got this huge clan that, despite two of its main members being in prison, still carries a huge amount of weight, still generates a huge amount of fear. That was always part of their strategy. And they've always used fear as a way of actually getting what they want and ensuring the loyalty of the people closest around them.
The Babasans' drug network has been dubbed the Turkish Connection. Members of the family in Europe and others in Istanbul work together to transport the heroin from eastern Turkey to the rest of the world. This structure has allowed the heroin shipments to be transported on a much larger scale, as every step of the way is overseen by trusted members of the gang. The Babasins control the trafficking trade by maintaining a regime of fear, ensuring complete loyalty and total silence. Even foreign journalists in Istanbul are not willing to talk. But with part of the Turkish connection based in the UK, Donal's going to talk to his contacts back in London. Coming up, Donal meets one of the world's most prolific heroin traffickers.
We was bringing in so much heroin, we actually brought the price of heroin down.
And explores the link between drug money and terrorism when he speaks to the victim of a terrorist attack.
Husband, when did you find out your husband had been killed?
I just felt I knew instantly. To me, there wasn't a shred of doubt.
We're with Donal MacIntyre in Istanbul, an enchanting and exciting city, but also a major player in global heroin distribution, and by association, a constant target for terrorist groups. Donal has hit a wall of silence, so he's flying to the UK for 24 hours to find someone who can tell him about the drug trade in Istanbul, the things that no one dares to reveal in the city itself.
Now, everybody in Istanbul were keen to tell me about the infamous Turkish connection, a criminal and smuggling network that has become one of the largest traffickers of heroin across the globe. Now, one of the founders of that network is Süleyman Ergin. Now, he's now based in London, and he's agreed to tell me all about it. Now, for his protection and for our welfare, we've agreed to meet him in a very public place.
Known throughout the criminal underworld as the North London Turk, Süleyman and his gang imported large shipments of heroin from Istanbul to the rest of Europe. The gang operated from the late 80s until their eventual arrest in the early 90s. The gang were sentenced to a total of 110 years in jail. Süleyman received 14 years for his involvement.
When I got arrested, my chest was full of red dots. There were snipers on top of the Enfield Town Library.
And were they right to mark you as a very dangerous man at the time?
Because they knew I always carried a gun. They knew I always carried a gun. They knew.
Have you used that gun in anger?
Yeah. Someone tried to rob me, they used it. I'm not going to say where and when or whatever, but I took his bollock off. Yeah, with the Beretta.
In their time, Süleyman and his gang smuggled thousands of kilos of heroin from Istanbul into Europe. With so much at stake, they were prepared to go to any lengths to distribute the drug.
So you were a notorious figure.
Yeah.
And you're regarded as one of the architects of the huge heroin connection, Turkish connection.
Yeah, well, I was in charge of the whole of the distribution of heroin and the collection of the proceeds in England. From Afghanistan to London, to Liverpool, to Manchester, to Scotland.
Via Istanbul?
Yeah, via Istanbul.
Did you escort it across Europe, across town, across London?
Yeah, I had a couple of cars with armed men in there.
And if you'd been stopped? Or?
It was going to be a mad shootout. Bazookas, Kalashnikovs, no questions asked. Because they were getting paid to do what they were supposed to do. If a blue light would have flashed behind us, that was it. They were getting shot.
The Turkish connection was such a big operation, and with so much money behind it, that Süleyman claims they were able to bribe officials at will.
And did you have policemen in your pay?
Yeah, in Italy, yeah.
Customs officers?
And over here, yeah. In the airports.
And how was you paying off the customs officers? Just
they were already paying off, cash. We was even taken into the back of Heathrow Airport to pick the goods up.
So it wouldn't go to customs, wouldn't even go to luggage carousel. No. They'd be taken off.
They'd be put aside for someone to collect.
The level of corruption Süleyman claims is alarming. Süleyman and the Turkish connection were able to smuggle shipments of heroin into countries like Britain on such a large scale that they eventually affected the street price of the drug.
We was bringing in so much heroin that You know, we just wanted to offload it. We was dealing 250, 300 kilos every couple of months. We actually brought the price of heroin down.
So you guys are making millions and millions of pounds?
Yeah. We used to walk into my house and empty 2 bin bags, black bin bags of money onto the living room floor, I don't know, £500,000. I just used to get sick of the sight of it. And I used to get someone else to count it for me because I just got sick of the sight of money. I'm sick of it.
In the drug business, it's possible to make a lot of money very quickly, but it's just as easy to lose it all. After his arrest, and with the prospect of 14 years behind bars, Suleiman turned to the very drugs he was supplying. And with Suleiman out of the way, a huge gap in the market opened up for the Babasins to move in.
And the Babasins, for example, big Turkish family, big connections, things like this, you know.
I know them, yeah.
And they were heavily involved in the trade here.
It was us that started Babashin off with 11 kilos.
You created the Babashin Empire?
Yeah. Babashin came to us and said, I've got 11 kilos, can you sort that out for me? We took it from Turkey to Italy. With that 11 kilos, Babashin built his empire.
Are they to be feared?
They are feared, yeah. I don't fear them, yeah. I don't fear them. But I know Babashin.
And
he's very crude, he's very cunning fella. Sly, couldn't be trusted.
The Babasin Empire now has connections with some far darker organisations in Turkey.
Well, they're involved in the PKK, guns and PKK. Now the PKK have got control of heroin as well. Babashin he couldn't go to Turkey for 4 years because he was in hiding in Iran and Iraq because he was supplying guns to the PKK.
Armed with this new information, Donal's back in Istanbul and heading out to the suburbs to meet his contact. This time, he hopes to find out more about the link between heroin and the PKK. The PKK, or the Kurdistan Workers' Party, are one of Turkey's most feared terrorist groups. When the modern Turkish Republic was established, little attention was paid to the old Ottoman Empire's ethnic provincial borders. The ancient region of Kurdistan was wiped off the map. The anger this caused in the Kurdish people led to the formation of the PKK, a Kurdish nationalist movement dedicated to the establishment of a Kurdish state. In the late 70s, they launched a terror campaign against the Turkish government, which has taken countless lives. The PKK want to reclaim their homeland. Istanbul and its financial centre has become a popular target for their bombing campaigns. Based on what Suleiman revealed in London, Donal's beginning to wonder whether these attacks are being directly funded by the heroin trade moving through the city.
Eskiden bu işin merkezi yani her yere Kolombiya üstünden dağıtılır diye biliyordu herkes. Yani bizim de duyduğumuz tabii bu ama başka kaçakçılık olan işleri biliyorum ben. Özellikle Türkiye'de bir PKK terörü var. Bu PKK terörünün beslendiği yerinde en büyük başında uyuşturucu geliyor. Bu uyuşturucu paralarından örgüte büyük gelirler sağlandı. Bir gerçek yani. Bunu sokaktaki insan da biliyor, ben de biliyorum. Herhalde devletin başındaki insanlar da biliyor.
Funded by drug money, the human cost of the PKK terror campaign is now in the thousands.
Sonra dağdaki terör bitmez. 30 bin kişi ölmüş bugüne kadar. 30 bin kişi ölür, 30 bin kişi daha çıkar daha kandırılarak. O 30 bin kişi de ölür, yeni bir 30 bin kişi çıkar.
The heroin flowing through Istanbul is ultimately to blame for these deaths. But with the drugs starting their journey in Afghanistan, there must be other terrorists cashing in. Nihad Altanez, a local journalist, understands the problem.
Uyuşturucu şöyle söyleyeyim yani bir kere Güneydoğu'dan özellikle Afganistan'dan, Irak'tan, İran'dan çıkan uyuşturucunun Terörizme yarar sağlamaması mümkün değil. Mesela bugün baktığın zaman El-Kaide, PKK, yanı sıra Orta Doğu'da işte çeşitli eylemlerin içerisinde olan örgütlerin tamamının kontrolünde zaten uyuşturucu veya insan kaçakçılığı. Sadece uyuşturucu olarak bakmamak gerekiyor bana.
Last year, the UN stated that at least $500 million from the Afghan heroin trade was going directly to the Taliban and associated terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda. These extremist groups are using it to bankroll terror campaigns against the West. Istanbul is a city with one foot in two continents and two cultures. Firmly rooted in the East, it welcomes business from the West. Tolerance of Western ideas has meant some Islamic extremists view Istanbul as a legitimate target.
International terrorism looms large over the city, as it does over pretty much every major tourist destination. But there are additional dangers inherent in living here.
In recent years, Al-Qaeda attacks on Western embassies in Istanbul have become an unwelcome reality. In July 2008, the US consulate was attacked, killing 3 policemen. And before that, Istanbul was struck by the biggest terrorist attack in its history. On November 20th, 2003, 2 suicide truck bombs hit the HSBC headquarters and the British consulate in a simultaneous attack.
English, no problem, okay. I can't see.
27 were killed and 400 wounded. Many of the dead were local Turks and not Westerners as planned. Al-Qaeda claimed responsibility, and since then, several people have been convicted for their involvement. Donal wants to hear about the human cost of this terrorist attack. He's going to talk to Victoria Short, the widow of the British Consul General Roger Short, killed by the bomb in 2003. Still a resident of Istanbul, this is the first television interview she has given since the day her husband was killed.
I was at the consulate working in the garden, as I tended to do. At about 11 o'clock in the morning, we usually have coffee. So I said to the gardener, I'll go out and buy the milk. And I was about midway round the consulate, and there was the explosion. I remember seeing things flying up in the air, and everybody ran.
2 trucks loaded with explosives had driven into the consul compound and detonated.
Everything was completely gone. It was the most really extraordinary. It was a bit like a desert beach. Everything was brown and nothing was there. It was all gone, completely. You can't really, if you haven't seen it, you can't believe it. Just gone. And no colour, everything brown. That's what I remember most.
With all this devastation around her, Victoria immediately knew the fate of her husband.
And when did you find out your husband had been killed?
Well, I just felt I knew instantly. There was just nothing there. You couldn't believe that anybody could, or anything could have survived.
Having heard firsthand the devastating impact of terrorism, Donal is determined to find out what the authorities are doing to combat it. Coming up, Donal meets the head of the Turkish Narcotics Bureau.
Geçen sene itibariyle 800-850 ton civarı olabileceğinden bahsedildi.
Donal MacIntyre's in Istanbul, a city trapped between the Afghan heroin trade and international terrorist networks funded by the drugs. Hundreds of millions of euros worth of the drugs are smuggled from the east, passing through this city and onto the streets of Western Europe. Donal has got up close and personal with the mafia organisations running the heroin business in Istanbul. He's heard from the people affected by the trade, from the drug addicts who use it, to the victims of terrorist attacks on the city. But what is being done to halt this industry? And what hope does the city have for the future? Turkey's narcotics unit is considered one of the best in the world. They train drug enforcement police from around the globe. Oguz Adin runs the department. He's proud of their successful seizures, but knows that these are just a drop in the ocean.
Geçen sene itibariyle 800-850 ton civarı olabileceğinden bahsedildi. Bu aslında çok ciddi bir yakalama olarak gözükmekle birlikte, bir başarı olarak addedilmekle birlikte biz bunun yeterli olduğuna inanmıyoruz. Biz üretimin hemen hemen %10'u kadarını yakalamış görünüyoruz.
With only 10% of heroin being seized, the war against drugs and organised crime is far from over. And although the Turkish authorities have a huge role to play, it's not a battle they can win on their own.
Uyuşturucu konusu tabii sadece ülkemizi ilgilenen bir problem, sorun değil. Bizim yürüttüğümüz çalışmalarda ve İngiliz meslektaşların ifadelerinde İngiltere içerisinde yapılan uyuşturucunun dağıtımında Türk organizasyonlarının etkin olduğu ifade ediliyor. Zaten biz de bu anlamda, bu kapsamda çalışmalar yürütüyoruz. Asıl amacımız olan insanların zehirlenmesine.
To stop people being poisoned by the drugs worldwide requires an international understanding of Turkey's unique problem and help to deal with it.
In Turkey, there are major problems for the Turkish authorities in dealing with drug traffickers. When they've got lorry loads of this stuff coming through, they protect it. They protect it with a lot of firepower. They've lost a lot of their brave officers and soldiers from being able to stop this stuff coming through. So for people in parts of the world, it can produce a very, very significant security threat.
Despite the hard work of international law enforcement, there are still large shipments of heroin being exported. With huge amounts of cash and a no-holds-barred mentality, it's still the drug lords who are calling the shots.
The problem with the drug business, as far as law enforcement is concerned, is that the drug traffickers have far fewer rules to follow than the law enforcement authorities do, and they have far more money to spend. All that customs and the police can ever do is play a game of catch-up. You know, they're always constantly one step behind. Every time they find out something new or find a new way to block the gangs will move on and try something else. The way organised crime is run these days, it's much more like a multinational corporation. Although you might have a particular figurehead who's in charge at one time, if that person goes, there's a rolling hierarchy of other people who can actually take over and run the game just as effectively. So although Hussein and Abdullah Babassin are now behind bars, it does seem that the elements of the clan still exist. Certainly the flow of heroin coming out of Afghanistan and through Turkey hasn't slowed down.
We came to Istanbul with Donal MacIntyre to investigate the heroin trade from Turkey into mainland Europe. But what we've discovered is the deadly link between the drugs trade and the war being fought in Afghanistan.
The real problem there is that it's the drug lords, the warlords, who control the poppy production, control the production of heroin, and then make a lot of money out of poor farmers, and they corrupt and ruin the country. What we have there is a very complex international problem. This is going to be a long-term fix to put a country together.
It's clear that this problem goes beyond poppy production. The heroin trade is entangled in a war in Afghanistan, a nationalist struggle in Kurdistan, as well as a fundamental clash between the societies of East and West. The relationship between drugs and terrorism is a terrifying modern-day reality, and so far there is no solution in sight. Istanbul has heroin coursing through its veins, and as long as the West's appetite for drugs continues to soar, then this mystical city will suffer the consequences. Donal MacIntyre, investigative journalist best known for his fearless work confronting dangerous criminal organisations, is on a mission to uncover the modern face of international crime. Travelling with him to some of the world's best-known cities, we'll meet members of the criminal underworld, police and local residents to discover what life is really like in the world's toughest towns. Donal's in a town gripped by a local gang war.
It's just fucking crazy out there at the moment.
Where £1 billion drug trade is fueling the rivalry. And the authorities are unable to cope.
We have been petrol bombed.
This says nobody's safe.
But Donal's not just a visitor here. This is Dublin, his hometown. And he's come back to find out why the city he grew up in is tearing itself apart. Dublin, Ireland, home to Oscar Wilde, James Joyce, U2 and Donal MacIntyre. As a young news reporter, he patrolled these streets writing about crime in the city. And 15 years later, he's back. Dublin was founded as a Viking settlement over 1,000 years ago and is now the capital of Ireland. Despite a history of political turbulence, it's culturally sophisticated and loved for its charms. Ireland is enjoying a period of political calm in which Dublin has flourished and has recently been the centre of an economic boom. But despite its recent success, Dublin is also in the grip of a power struggle between warring gangs. The extent of the violence has made the army bomb squads busier than they were during the Northern Ireland conflict. Donal has come to Dublin to uncover this new threat to the city. He's returned to his hometown to find out why it's being seduced by a flood of readily available hard drugs.
Well, this is Temple Bar, and this is the party district of Dublin. This is where the hen parties, the American tourists, the students, the stag doos, they come to party and to excess. But I'm going to show you a part of Dublin tourists don't go, tourists don't want to see, and frankly a part of Dublin which terrifies the life out of me.
Ireland's crime rate is one of the highest in Europe. 1 in 4 people report that they have been the victim of crime. Gangland crimes have the lowest detection rate, with just 15% being solved. Donal wants to learn about the gangs who are fighting for control on Dublin streets. So he's arranged to meet Ireland's most distinguished crime journalist, Paul Williams.
Who? Hang on a second, hang on. Yeah, how are you? Hang on there, Kev. Yeah? What's wrong?
Paul's been a crime reporter in this city for over 21 years, and his relentless pursuit of the truth has made him the scourge of gangland's criminal kingpins. With gangland activity on the rise, he's rarely away from his phones, negotiating with police contacts and aggrieved gangsters.
But it was only a small clipping job, is it?
He's promised to fill Donal in on the city's exploding criminal scene.
It's just fucking crazy out there at the moment. Dublin has emerged probably as one of the most violent cities in modern Western Europe. In the first 20 days of 2009, a total of 5 men have been murdered in Dublin. Another 5 have been shot and seriously injured. To say this town at the moment is like a powder keg, there's no way it could be accused of hyperbolizing or exaggerating it. In the Republic of Ireland last year, a population of 4 million people, we had in excess of 21 gangland murders, the majority of them here in Dublin. These are murders where criminals get guns and go out and assassinate or execute each other. This is not counting fellas who have been kicked to death or stabbed to death or driven across by cars or given overdoses to get them out of the way. These guys are armed with the best of stuff. The weapon of choice in this town is the Glock automatic. They have SIG automatic pistols. They have, in some cases, AK-47s, HK MP5s, which are the weapon of choice for special forces across the world.
In the past 48 hours, there have been 2 more gangland murders. As a crime journalist, this means that Paul's in high demand.
Okay. I'll just do a quick radio interview, is that right?
A post-mortem examination will be carried out later on the body of the latest gangland murder victim here in Dublin.
Extraordinary developments. It's getting better by the day, as they say, or busier by the day, or madder by the day. The thing is out of control. It is quite literally out of control. The reality is that you cannot stop a coked-up lunatic who's out of control with no sense of behavioural boundaries or parameters going out and shooting somebody else.
Small-time gangster and drug dealer Stephen O'Halloran was shot 4 times in the chest and once in his head as he sat in his car on this estate in Tala, South Dublin. In a separate incident here in North Dublin, top gangland figure Graham McNally was shot 6 times in the head. It's believed McNally was double-crossed by his gangland boss who suspected McNally was trying to muscle in on his drug-dealing empire. These feuds are commonplace amongst the estimated 140 drug gangs operating in Dublin.
That paranoia, that let's kill him before he kills me mentality, the fact that weapons are so widely available. There are guys actually killing other associates purely on a whim because they suspect that person might be trying to set them up when that might not be true. So it is sort of taken on a whole life of its own. And it's resulting literally in madness.
Since the dawn of the new millennium, there have been over 130 gang-related murders. That's more than took place in London, a city 10 times the size.
Well, there's never been a better time to catch up on the drug and criminal scene in Dublin, because Dublin has never had it so bad. The highest number of seizures, the highest number of murders. This is a town which is caught in a drug epidemic.
The victims in this conflict are often dealt with by the men and women of the Dublin Fire Brigade and Ambulance Service. This unique unit comprises both trained firefighters and paramedics and responds to all emergencies across the centre of Dublin.
Delta 6-4, priority message, go ahead.
The shift has barely started and already the calls are flying in.
Control calling Delta 2-4 now. Delta 6-4, that just say premature baby and cardiac arrest. Delta 2-4, I have a case there for you lads. You want to set off the bells?
Officer Barney Mulhall has never been so busy. He responds to every call from a drug overdose to gangland shootings. And it's not just the gang members who are being attacked.
It can be dangerous at times So unfortunately, we are seen as a target. Verbal abuse to stone thrown, bottling. We have been petrol bombed.
But gangland fallout isn't his only concern. Barney also deals with the reckless behaviour of drunken revellers enjoying Dublin's nightlife.
11 Force Control, is 102 in attendance.
As Barney moves through the city centre, the scale of his task becomes apparent.
Sorry Ian, while I'm talking to you, there's a big melee after breaking out. I'm on Liffey Street, lower, and there's 6 or 7 people thumping the head off one another, so you need the guards here as soon as you can.
Barney's seen it all a million times and is calm under pressure, but it's not easy on the front line.
It's well ensued.
As a lone officer, Barney is forced to wait for backup from the Garda before attempting to intervene.
It's actually after spilling onto the quays now on the same side as the bridge, so they're still going at one another.
But for Barney, the increase in gang crime and firearm-related incidents is more disturbing. Gunshot admissions to Dublin's James Connolly Hospital have increased 400% in the last 4 years.
I have responded to numerous amounts of shootings. When you have somebody lying dead in front of you, that shows how brutal it is. And the people that are doing it, there's no compassion in them. Absolutely no compassion.
It's not long before Dublin's gangland makes its presence felt out on the streets and Barney has to respond. As he arrives near the scene, more details emerge about the nature of the call. A family has been attacked by a gang as they walked home in North Dublin.
Just give us a look.
Oh, braces on.
Okay, that's gone.
Yourself, you were hit just in the face, is it? Okay, the fact that you've been hit there, it'll do no harm for you to be seen in the hospital. Just to get a check over, that mightn't look an awful lot, but to which?
That's how you do nothing, you get attacked for nothing.
Oh, that's how crazy.
You know, we didn't do anything.
Right.
We came out with our street flats and
started
attacking us, you know.
They were looking for trouble, so.
Yeah, crowd of them, you know. Just out of nowhere.
Was it? Yeah. And
it's crazy, isn't it? It's a crazy world now.
Looked like he was just gone for somebody like that.
Gang members in Dublin are so out of control that it's become normal for youths to roam the streets attacking innocent bystanders. This time the gang were armed with baseball bats. The family managed to get away before the situation became more serious. The violence Barney encounters is often drug-related. He's all too familiar with the damage and misery that drugs cause.
I've lost count to the number of overdoses that I've responded to and the amount of time that I'm in the service. The workload is just increasing all the time. And it doesn't necessarily have to be in what people would say deprived areas or not. It doesn't matter. Drugs are drugs.
For Barney, the increase in drugs on the streets is evident. Every day in Ireland, someone dies of a drug overdose. The flooded marketplace means competition for customers is fierce amongst the dealers on Dublin streets. An EU survey has now ranked Ireland as the easiest place in the whole of Europe to find and buy Class A drugs.
Through our Dublin contacts, I've managed to secure an interview with a former addict and drug dealer who's keen to talk to me. Now, these drug dealers, they're the foot soldiers for the gang bosses. And I want to know what it's like to work for a gang boss and how they go about dodging the bullets in this city.
Donal's contact asked for his identity to be concealed in order to protect himself and his family from possible reprisals.
You know, I used to hide it everywhere. I used to hide me stuff in cans of Coke.
I used to hide my stuff in cans of Coke, down the shoes, in my mouth.
In my mouth.
up my arse as well.
Up my annual as well.
I'd have bars in my windows. I'd have steel gates on the landings. I'd steel gates on the front door, behind the door, in the hall of the flat.
The hall and the flat.
I used to buy it in quantities. Like at the time, it would have been 1,800 quid an ounce. You double your money on it at the time because it was like 20 quid a bag. It was just kind of more like getting sweets out of the shop, really. It's more available now.
It's more available now.
Years ago, you'd have to stand around waiting until somebody came. Now you can go to any part of the country and get it down anywhere, not just Dublin, anywhere in the country.
But for Dublin's dealers, the biggest fear isn't the police or the threat of jail. It's the ruthless violence meted out by the gangland bosses.
People out there, if you owe them
whether you owe them 20 quid or 100 quid, they'll go through any door looking for it. The way they look at it, if you let one person away with it, with 50 euro, 20 euro,
or 20 euro, everybody's going to do it, so they're going to make an example.
So they're going to make an example of one if it's taking them into the car, to the back roads, or shoot them, or stab them,
or whatever, you know.
There's a lot more shooting now in the last couple of years than there was maybe 10, 15 years ago. You could be anywhere, in the wrong place, at the wrong time, you're going to get shot.
It's a sad fact that the people of Dublin have had to steel themselves to conflict because of Ireland's turbulent past. The Easter Uprising of 1916 and subsequent Irish War of Independence were designed to end British rule across Ireland. Further conflict began in 1922 with the Civil War, which pitted the Irish against each other. Out of this struggle, the Irish Republican Army was formed. In recent years, the IRA's most notable battles were on the streets of Northern Ireland. The Northern Ireland conflict, or the Troubles as they are commonly known, have accounted for nearly 4,000 people being killed in a bloody campaign that lasted over 30 years. The IRA forged allies around the world, developing illegal trade routes with terrorist organisations and using them to smuggle weapons and explosives. During this time, Dublin was one of the IRA's heartlands, and their presence meant that they had a unique grip over crime in the city. The IRA policed Dublin's estates, expelling and sometimes killing drug dealers that were destroying their communities. Donal wants to explore the possible links between the former IRA and Dublin's modern-day gangland fraternity. He's meeting with security correspondent Jim Cusack, who's agreed to share his knowledge.
The Italian mafia sprung from the nationalist movements of the 19th century, and the triads is similar. And what happened there in Italy and China before, and other places, has just happened in Ireland in the last 2 decades, where former nationalist paramilitary or terrorist movements gave way to what became major criminal conspiracies.
How involved are retired IRA activists in crime in Dublin?
Well, there was one particular instance there, and it's a matter that's still before the courts, where a well-known IRA family here in Dublin went straight from Republican paramilitarism, terrorism, straight into the heroin trade, and they became very big at it. They were actually bringing stuff in by the caseload, hiring planes, and that added a new element to it here, added a new element of professionalism. They were bringing the tricks of the trade that they learned as an international, highly efficient and successful terrorist group. They brought that to bear on the criminal scene here in Dublin, and it definitely upped the ante.
What are the links between dissident Republicans and other criminal networks?
There was an outbreak of violence in South Inner Dublin in 2007, 2008, and that was all dissident Republicans fighting with the old provisional IRA and with local drug dealers, and that was all over money from drugs.
Is witness intimidation a big problem in this town?
Witness intimidation is very, very common here. You had one case last year where 14 witnesses and a jury, at least one jury member, were intimidated, up to including a man coming into one of the witnesses' place of work with a balaclava on, pointing a gun at his head and saying, "If you give evidence, you're dead." And that goes on all the time.
With an established modus operandi, it wasn't difficult for the former members of the IRA to transfer their skills to other endeavours.
They used to import arms into this country, and they had very well established arms networks and smuggling routes coming from Eastern Europe and sometimes Southern Europe, and particularly Spain. And those same routes were transferred into drugs.
Men who had brutalised dealers under IRA law are now dealers themselves. Links to South American drug cartels were first confirmed in 2001 when 3 IRA members were found deep in the Colombian jungle negotiating with a terrorist group known for cocaine production. Then in 2007, a boat containing €500 million worth of cocaine was intercepted off the west coast of Ireland. But these drugs weren't just destined for the Emerald Isle.
They have made Ireland a gateway for drugs, definitely into Britain. Irish cocaine dealers became very, very big in the last 10, 15 years on the continent. And there was no end to the supply of cocaine coming in here. And you've seen drugs seeping into places where they never existed before. Parts of the country which were completely drug-free 5, 10 years ago now have serious problems with heroin and other hard drugs.
The city's gangs haven't been long on this particular path. Still, they've managed to flood Ireland with heroin and cocaine, and they're looking to expand their market into mainland Europe.
We do have some of the most professional criminals in Europe, and a lot of that has to do with the inherited experience and intelligence they got as being with the IRA. The IRA was an incredibly efficient terrorist organisation.
Coming up, Donal joins Dublin Customs on the front line in the war against drugs.
I'd say it's under the bunk, it's just something dense.
And he finds out how easy it is to make a car bomb. A place of inspiration to poets, novelists and playwrights alike, Dublin has a huge cultural heritage. But it also has a less romantic aspect. The drug trade in Ireland is €1 billion industry. In 2007, Irish Customs intercepted over €135 million of drugs as they entered the country. But it's thought that this is only 10% of the amount successfully smuggled in. The Port of Dublin sees nearly 1.5 million passengers come through its barriers each year. With an additional 30 million tonnes of container freight, the men and women of Dublin's customs have their work cut out. It's up to them to intercept illegal loads of drugs and guns. Donal is going to meet Customs Officer Martin Rogers at Dublin Port to see how customs are trying to stem the flow of drugs into the city.
The war on drugs is a very complex and difficult field for us to fight because there's so many different challenges facing law enforcement when it comes to the war on drugs.
Is Customs winning the war against drugs?
We're a frontline service whose primary mission is to keep drugs out of this country. We do our best to keep it out. But there are a number of factors within every society which makes a drugs problem happen. But as customs officers on the front line, we have a personal responsibility as well as an agency responsibility to protect the people of this country.
Martin and his team target drug smuggling on several fronts.
Thank you very much.
Foot passengers that arrive at the port are often met by Andrea and sniffer dog Thatcher. Trained to sniff out firearms and drugs, he is one of the most successful drug dogs in Dublin.
His largest seizure so far will be 20 kilos of herbal cannabis. He got a while back there. The prisoner was arrested and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. So that would be his biggest one to date. But all the dogs, I think, throughout the country have had huge success in relation to drugs and cigarettes and cash that have been seized by them.
However, success comes at a price. One of Thatcher's predecessors was kidnapped from his kennel by suspected gangland figures. Thankfully, the dog was later rescued. But with the volume of traffic passing through the port, Martin needs more than just Thatcher to help detect contraband. Nearly 500,000 containers and lorries arrive in Dublin port every year. It would take one officer up to an hour to search each one. So they've invested in a new weapon to fight drug smuggling, and it can search a lorry in just 3 minutes.
X-rays about to be produced.
Costing €3 million, the scanner x-rays the lorry and can distinguish weapons and drugs from the rest of the load.
Yeah, go ahead.
Control to Bravo, Oscar. That last one there, you might just want to have a look at the cab, just do a quick cab search and have a look behind the driver's seat.
If anything within the container raises suspicion, it's opened up and a customs officer can be guided to the exact spot.
I'd say it's under the bunk, there's just something dense. I'd say there could be tools or of some kind.
The whole idea is for these guys to cloak these smuggled goods in legitimate traffic. The new technology is very important and vital to us because we need state-of-the-art equipment in order to identify the sometimes very sophisticated methods that smugglers use to hide their goods.
For Martin, however, one of the best tools to fight the war on drugs in Dublin is himself.
Hello, so what brings you to Ireland today? Okay, you carrying any large amounts of cash into the country? May I see your passport if you don't mind? The old technology is very important as well, because the oldest technology a customs officer has, and sometimes the most important, are his intelligence, his eyes and his ears. The revenue nose, they used to call it, where a customs officer, through visual profiling, can see something that doesn't look right.
But even the best trained revenue nose can't sniff out all the drugs entering Ireland. In 2003, the Garda seized €650 million worth of drugs, 5 times what was confiscated at customs. This confirmed the fact that Dublin's criminal fraternity have taken advantage of their connections around the world to saturate the city. Dublin's underworld bosses are gaining in confidence, and reminiscent of Chicago's Prohibition era, they've been given nicknames adding glamour and kudos to their criminal standing. Dublin's most notorious boss is Fat Freddie Thompson. Aged just 27, he is the leader of the Drimna gang, who are currently involved in a brutal turf war in South Dublin. He currently has a €100,000 contract out on his life, brought by Declan Wacker Duffy, leader of the INLA, a militant wing of the IRA. Another of Fat Freddy's foes is Martin the Viper Foley. At 57, he's survived 5 attempts on his life, the last being when he was shot 8 times outside his gym. One of Ireland's most notorious gangland godfathers was John Gilligan. Now serving a 20-year prison sentence for masterminding a €40 million drug smuggling operation. During his heyday, he built a formidable criminal empire, but it came crashing down to earth in 1996. Dublin journalist Veronica Guerin had been writing about Gilligan and his gang, exposing their criminal escapades. Feeling she was a threat to his empire, he issued orders for her to be killed. On the 26th of June, she was driving home when a motorcycle pulled alongside her car. The hitman fired 6 shots into Veronica, killing her instantly. The story of her assassination became so notorious a Hollywood film was made of the events that led to her death. Donal has come to meet her brother Jimmy to talk about Veronica's murder and what it meant to Dublin's criminal underworld.
And what kind of person was Veronica?
She was typical Dublin. Wonderful person, type of character you meet every day of the week, full of personality, full of life, loved her family. Her occupation was that of a journalist, and she was in pursuit of truth. She believed in seeking social justice, and if she could use the pen to do that, she did it.
Why did Gilligan and Co. think they could get away with murder?
They totally underestimated what the public reaction would be to the murder of a journalist and a young mother who was going about her business. There had been numerous shootings within Dublin by that gang in the previous 12 months, and there had never been public outcry the same as there was against Veronica's death, because these people were shooting each other, and there isn't the same sympathy and there isn't the same feeling of disgust if a drug dealer or a gang member is killed. And they had I believe they became to believe that they were untouchable and they could do anything and get away with anything.
Dublin's untouchables had crossed a line, murdering a journalist in cold blood on the streets of the city. It became a pivotal point in gangland's history, but rather than lead to their ruin, they continued to grow.
Unfortunately, I don't see any reduction in the amount of crime in our streets. I don't see that people refer to Veronica's death, or indeed the deaths of others who have been innocently killed by drugs, and that has achieved anything which has reduced the horror on our streets. The best way that I can describe it, it's like blood running through the veins of a body. There is no section, community that escapes the horrors of drugs within our country at the moment. But I don't believe that the war is lost. I believe it's an ongoing war where there's no doubt but we're losing the battles. But I think in the end, right wins, and I think people will see that by supporting these gangs, all we're doing is contributing to the terror and the horror on our own streets.
A journalist murdered on the streets of a major Western European country is extremely disturbing. But this cavalier attitude is commonplace amongst the criminal underworld. But shootings aren't the only weapon in the gang's arsenal. Using the knowledge and experience gained during the Troubles, Dublin's criminals are now upping the ante. The use of bombs, grenades and explosive devices has increased by over 300% since 2007, with the bomb squad responding to 174 call-outs last year. The Army Bomb Disposal Unit are busier now than they were during the IRA's most brutal bombing campaign. In 2003, crime journalist Paul Williams had a bomb attached to his car, one of many attempts on his life.
I'm on my way to meet Tony Lewis. Now, he's a man with a military background and he knows exactly how to make car and pipe bombs. Now, he promises to show me how they're put together and, more importantly, the damage that they can cause.
Tony is a forensic expert who's called to examine crime scenes involving explosives across Great Britain and Ireland.
So these are the ingredients of a very powerful homemade weapon.
They certainly are, yep. This is obviously, it's a steel tube threaded at both ends and then capped off with a blanking cap. And quite simply, you would place the improvised explosive, which is a kitchen sink explosive, into the tube and then screw on the cap, which has got a detonator in the end of that. And it's as simple as that. You've now got a lethal weapon ready to go.
The explosives packed in this pipe bomb are made up from half a kilo of basic kitchen chemicals, which can be bought in any high street store.
How much damage would a pipe bomb like this do?
That would certainly do enough damage to a vehicle to kill the occupant, if not at least severely injure them. This can be enhanced. I mean, they can add to this nails, nuts and bolts, bearings, whatever, if they want to enhance the shrapnel effect.
Traditionally, how would you attach a pipe bomb like that to a car?
Number of ways. Cable ties is a handy way of doing it. It's a little bit time consuming. I mean, the guy wants to get in there, get the bomb placed, get out again. In the case for us, we've got a powerful magnet. When that's attached to the bomb, it's literally a case then of just leaning underneath and placing it under the car. The bomb itself is filled with the detonator in place. We'll then attach that to the magnet. Obviously now we need to put the triggering mechanism in place, which is just a case of actually taping or cable tying that into position and then placing your two wires into the box.
And then this would be your radio controlled zap.
Is that. So once you've turned on the arm key, it's literally then just a case of press the arm button, press the fire button.
Tony adds some finishing touches to the bomb and they head toward the car. In Dublin, the bomb squad are called to devices like these once every 2 days.
So we've got the target's car.
Yeah.
So what we really want is we want to make sure we're getting the target because we want the guy who's driving it. So the best way to do that is either clamp it onto the side or on the roof, but most effectively would be underneath. So to do that, we would literally slide it underneath the car, get it underneath his seat, and clamp it on, and that's ready to go.
And even if, as a traffic light, you could just call by and bang, and by the time you've sped off, zap.
Yep. He wouldn't even necessarily know what's happened. He wouldn't be able to see out of his window unless he wound it down and had a look over, and that's to your advantage when you press the button.
But I mean, isn't it a terrifying prospect to know that years and years of that kind of technological kind of terrorist know-how is now entering the gangster underworld?
Well, this becomes more of a tit-for-tat thing. Before, it was a carefully pre-planned all military operation, if you like. At this stage, what we're doing now is we're going to take this guy out, they're going to want to take one of our guys out, and it just escalates.
Tony arms the device and Donal moves back away from the blast zone. The safety area is 300 metres away, a luxury innocent bystanders wouldn't have in Dublin.
Okay, what we're going to do now is you will press the test button till the light flashes red, and then you'll press 1 and fire, which is this button, and that will...
And you're going to give an audible warning.
I'm going to do that now just before we're ready to go. Yep.
3, 2, 1.
Imagine that in the city centre.
Imagine that, yeah, the carnage that would actually do, the carnage. Let's see the damage.
Okay, let's see what's happened.
Now that would send a message, wouldn't it, to a rival drug dealer?
I don't think anybody in that vehicle would have survived back seat or front seat.
Look at that.
It's absolutely incredible. I mean, the debris comes way back to here, getting into slightly larger pieces. The bonnet ended up over there.
That is horrific, isn't it? Look at that. I mean, that is just...
That's half a kilo, about a pound. This says nobody's safe. You know, this is indiscriminate. This can be done when they want, how they want. Yeah, very, very effective.
So is this the kind of, typically the scene after a pipe bomb in a car?
Yes, I mean, the actual damage, if you look at it, most of it's occurred, well, all of the damage, the most severe damage has occurred in the area of the driver. Unfortunately, the driver of this vehicle would have literally probably been blown in two, unfortunately. It really is a sobering thing to see.
Coming up, Donal meets the woman standing up to gangland's criminal kingpins.
I have been threatened by drug dealers. I've threatened them back, basically. I know where they live, they know where I live.
Donal MacIntyre is in his native town, Dublin, where he's learning some disturbing home truths. Local gang bosses have used the old IRA smuggling routes to flood the country with illegal drugs and firearms. Now, with the gangs killing each other over valuable dealing turf, the people of Dublin are caught in the crossfire.
What are the consequences? I would say that the consequences are that a lot more people are going to die. I don't think it's going to go away. I really don't believe it's going to stop. Because you see, every time one guy is taken out, there's always somebody to replace him, and that's happening quicker and quicker and quicker. The number of murders is going through the roof. The number of attempted murders is going through the roof. The number of bomb incidents have gone through the roof. And the death toll is going up all the time. So no, it's not. I don't believe it's going to end. I believe it's going to get a lot worse. In fact, it's given Ireland a very, very bad name.
But amongst the wreckage, the people of Dublin are starting to fight back.
Well, just 5 kilometres from the tourist hotspot of Temple Bar is the Crumlin area of Dublin. Now that's the centre of a major gangland feud between the Crumlin and Drimnagh gangs led by Fat Freddie Thompson and Declan Whacker Duffy. And of course the battle is over drug distribution and cash.
Susan Collins lives in the heart of Crumlin and knows the problems affecting the community better than most.
The Crumlin Road actually divides two of the most prominent gangs in the Dublin area. The gangs have, in my opinion, no morals, and they actually don't care about the community that they live in. Most roads in this area would have a dealer. I do live on a road that has gangsters living on it, and I'm sure they watch me and I watch them.
In 1996, Susan's brother died from a drug overdose. Having witnessed how the drug epidemic in the city was affecting her community, she set up Addiction Response Crumlin to help addicts and their families. The local dealers saw this as a threat to their business and confronted her, but she's not scared.
I have been threatened by drug dealers a number of times. I've threatened them back, basically. I know where they live, they know where I live. Although I would be well aware to mind myself when I'm walking around the community. I would change what way I go or things like that, you know. I'm no fool. I'm not going to be caught up in this feud. I can protect myself. You'd want to be mad not to be scared of them. I have felt like moving out, but then that's like you allow people to bully you out of your own area, and I'm just not going to do it. So I'm staying.
For Susan, the problems she faces in Crumlin are the same as those faced across Dublin and Ireland.
There's like a gangster world developed in this country that people wouldn't actually believe. There's a lot of young people being dragged into the dealing of drugs, and children as young as 10 are now being used to carry the drugs around the city on push bikes. Anyone could get drugs in this area quicker than you'd get a pizza delivered to your house.
Susan's frontline approach has given her unique insight into what's happening.
I don't think people buying drugs realise that they're actually fueling these gangs. They need to recognise that when they get their coke for their Saturday night party, they're fueling the gang that's killing my community.
With the gangland war continuing in Dublin, it will take more people like Susan to stand up to rid the city of the gangs and their drug empires. But when faced with ruthless killers who aren't scared of assassinating journalists and who use bombs on an alarmingly regular basis, the fear that seeps out of the city is understandable.
Number 55, Crumlin Road, please.
Well, the Dublin I grew up in and the city I call home is a million miles away from the city I've uncovered now. And with the Dublin drug gangs emerging as a force akin to the Italian mafia, I have to fear that the future of this beautiful city will be one of continued bloodshed and senseless murder. And as I leave my hometown, I'm left wondering if the Irish troubles are over or if they've just begun.